Chapter 29:12. Confidence. When Shifeng took out two old and tattered designs, Feng Shihan initially discounted them. She still thought that his decision was too rash. While the 5 first-rate guilds in question might not have as many peak experts as the various superpowers, they still had over 300,000 Tier 3 players under their command, with some even having 400,000. Such a large force of Tier 3 players could influence the Twin Towers Kingdom's defensive battle significantly. Even the current Zero Wing only had around 1.2 million Tier 3 players, just the average for a superpower. However, after Feng Shihan took a look at the text on the designs, she immediately fell into a daze. "Guild leader, are you playing a trick on me?" Feng Shihan couldn't help asking. She had seen many treasures during her time in mythology. However, no matter how she looked at the designs for the Blue Thunder flying ship and Flame Beast puppet, she still felt as if she was dreaming. At this stage of the game, the 5 great super guilds had already acquired their own flying ships. However, those were only basic flying ships, which were significantly inferior to the Crimson flying ship, let alone the Blue Thunder flying ship. As for combat puppets, as far as she knew, mythology's strongest combat puppets were 3 mysterious iron combat puppets, which were used to safeguard mythology's main headquarters. Mythology had even tasked Tier 4 NPCs to keep a constant watch on these war weapons to prevent theft. "Do you think I need to do that?" Shifeng chuckled when he saw Feng Shihan's skeptical look. He could understand Feng Shihan's doubts. Mysterious iron flying ships and secret silver combat puppets shouldn't be available to players at this stage of the game, let alone the designs for them. With these designs, so long as Zero Wing had sufficient materials, it could produce a plethora of these war weapons. And with the power of these war weapons, Zero Wing could devastate the entire continent. "Sure. I'll go and reject those guilds now," Feng Shihan said, smiling. A hint of excitement also gleamed in her eyes. Although she had already grown accustomed to holding a powerful identity and position during her time as one of mythology's vice guild leaders, her heart still swelled with excitement and expectations. If Zero Wing could produce the Blue Thunder flying ship and Flame Beast puppet in time, it was almost certain to win the upcoming defensive battle at the Twin Towers Kingdom. Afterward, the 5 first-rate guilds and numerous second-rate guilds peacefully developing in the kingdoms neighboring the Twin Towers Kingdom received Feng Shihan's overbearing response. Feng Shihan did not embellish her message with any redundant words. Instead, her reply contained only one word: "Frem." The 5 first-rate guilds and many second-rate guilds were dumbfounded upon seeing this response. What arrogance! Zero Wing is simply too arrogant. Zero Wing isn't taking our 5 guilds seriously at all. When the guild leaders of the 5 first-rate guilds who had gathered for a meeting saw Feng Shihan's reply, they unanimously jumped out of their seats and cursed in anger. Before the War of Worlds began, the superpowers held incredibly powerful influence over God's domain, such that first-rate guilds like theirs could only bear with the injustice and live with their heads down. However, after the Outer Worlds NPC army invaded, the Eastern Continent's superpowers had no choice but to beg the first-rate guilds for help to defend their territories and routes. Yet despite facing imminent danger, Zero Wing actually dared tell their 5 guilds to scram. Zero Wing was simply tired of living. "If Zero Wing wants to be arrogant, let it," the guild leader of Holy Seal sneered as he read Feng Shihan's reply. "Once the battle at the Twin Towers Kingdom begins, we'll see how Zero Wing continues behaving arrogantly when it lacks manpower." "That's right. Since Zero Wing looks down on us, we'll just help other superpowers. Zero Wing will live to regret its decision today," the guild leader of another first-rate guild said, nodding. "If Zero Wing asks us for help later on, it won't get such a good price from us again." Many superpowers had already sent representatives to deliver invitations to their 5 first-rate guilds. Among them, Starlink's offer was particularly generous. Their 5 guilds had no need to worry about finding a superpower to employ them for their services. Their 5 first-rate guilds combined could field a massive army of 1.6 million Tier 3 players and 64 Tier 4 players. Apart from peak experts and apex experts, the alliance of their 5 guilds was not the slightest bit weaker than the average superpower. This was the basis of their confidence. Once their 5 guilds went to aid Starlink and Starlink's side repelled the Outer Worlds NPC army, Zero Wing would definitely regret rejecting their offer. And once Zero Wing came begging them for help, They would thoroughly bleed the guild for every penny it had. The other 3 guild leaders nodded in agreement, wanting Zero Wing to taste the misery of defending the Twin Towers Kingdom without their 5 guilds. Following this, the 5 first-rate guilds collaborated with the uncommitted second-rate guilds and accepted Starlink's invitation to join the Dark Knight Empire's defensive line. This sudden development caught even Lu Tiandi off guard momentarily. "Young master, what do you think is going through Black Flame's mind?" Eqa asked curiously as he looked at the signed contracts he just received. The combined force of these 5 first-rate guilds is by no means weak, and even the super guilds over at the Fire Dragon Empire have eagerly sought their help. With how much these 5 guilds covet Zero Wing City and Ancient Rock City, even if Zero Wing allots only a small portion of those 2 cities' shares to them, these 5 guilds would probably agree to help Zero Wing. Yet now, Black Flame is just too prideful. He thinks that just because he is a Tier 5 Sword Saint and God's Domain's strongest player, he doesn't need to fear the Outer World's NPC army, Lu Tiandi said nonchalantly. He doesn't know just how powerful the NPC army is. Once the real battle begins, even Tier 5 players will be nothing but a joke. If it were before Lu Tiandi had clashed with the Outer World's NPC army, he would have considered Shifeng's decision unwise but understandable. After all, Tier 5 players were many times stronger than Tier 4 players. It wouldn't even be surprising to see a Tier 5 player single-handedly destroy a city. However, after experiencing the Dark Knight Empire's defensive battle against the Outer World's NPC army, Lu Tiandi now understood that while Tier 5 NPCs were indeed powerful, they weren't invincible. This was especially true in battlefields that involved war weapons and Tier 4 NPCs using battle arrays. Every targeted city in the Dark Knight Empire would face at least 10 battle arrays formed by Tier 4 NPCs and around 500 Tier 4 NPCs. Even if a superpower dispatched all its Tier 4 players, it wouldn't be able to do a thing against such a force. Not to mention Zero Wing was going to defend an entire kingdom by itself, so there was no way it could afford to concentrate all its Tier 4 players in one battlefield. Moreover, unlike the previous War of Worlds, the Outer World's NPC army had many more Tier 5 NPCs in its ranks this time. Just one Tier 5 player couldn't do anything against the Outer World's NPC army. A large number of Tier 3 and Tier 4 players was necessary to whittle down the NPC army and achieve victory. Otherwise, the Outer World's NPC army would simply trample over the Twin Towers Kingdom's cities and fortresses. But this is good for us. If not for Black Flame's arrogance, these 5 first-rate guilds wouldn't have joined us, Lu Tiandi said, smiling. Starlink wasn't the only superpower defending the Dark Knight Empire. There were also Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul. Only the 3 guilds were separately defending their respective territories. If Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul failed to defend the NPC cities and fortresses they operated, both guilds would suffer a major setback. After all, both guilds had their headquarters in the Dark Knight Empire. However, while the Eastern continent's various superpowers were discussing Zero Wing's unwise decision, Zero Wing continued operating as usual. The guild frenziedly recruited God's Domain's newcomers and sequentially developed Zero Wing City and Ancient Rock City. It also relied on the Tier 3 legacies from the Secret Covenant Tower to steadily increase its Tier 3 population. The 5 first-rate guilds' partnership with Starlink did not affect Zero Wing's operations at all. On the contrary, the number of independent experts coming to help defend the Twin Towers Kingdom even skyrocketed. This was because after Zero Wing garrisoned Starmoon Kingdom, Starmoon Kingdom's NPC cities established direct teleportation links to Zero Wing's guild cities. This was a great convenience for players seeking to travel to Zero Wing's guild cities. The ability to teleport straight to Ancient Rock City was especially welcomed by players seeking to explore and raid the Orc capital city. Because of the popularity of this new teleportation service, Feng Shirhan created a bounty system for Outer World NPCs. Under this bounty system, players would receive 5 points for killing a Tier 3 NPC, 500 points for killing a Tier 4 NPC, and 100,000 points for killing a Tier 5 NPC. Players would also receive ranks according to the points they accumulated. Players that accumulated 100,000 bounty points would receive the bronze rank, which would entitle them to a lifetime discount of 5% on entrance fees and accommodation fees for all of Zero Wing's guild cities. At 1 million points, players would receive the silver rank and enjoy a 10% discount. At 10 million points, players would receive the gold rank and enjoy a 20% discount. After the announcement of this bounty system, over 1 million Tier 3 independent experts and 200 Tier 4 independent experts flooded into the Twin Towers Kingdom's border cities and fortresses from other kingdoms in just one day. All of them sought to accumulate Zero Wings bounty points to reduce their expenditure in Ancient Rock City and Zero Wing City. The various superpowers grew envious over this situation and promptly adopted Zero Wings ranking system. Only the results weren't as effective. While independent players were flooding the Twin Towers Kingdom, Shifeng gathered the Candlelight trading firm's elites and began frantically researching, then manufacturing the Blue Thunder flying ship and Flame Beast puppet. Manufacturing these two war weapons didn't require just precious materials but also high-level forging techniques, alchemy techniques, enchanting techniques and knowledge of magic arrays. Grandmaster-level lifestyle players had to take charge of the process. The Blue Thunder flying ship in particular required the cooperation of 3 Grandmaster Forgers. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. In the current God's domain, only the Candlelight trading firm could provide such manpower. Even after researching for an entire day, Shifeng and the others only managed to scratch the surface of the design. It would take several more days to construct a Blue Thunder flying ship. On the other hand, to Shifeng's joy, both Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose finally made a full recovery. Apart from losing some of their combat memories and having their combat standards weakened slightly, they experienced no other side effects after taking life water. Moreover, the two of them also succeeded in creating their Tier 5 mana bodies and got promoted to Tier 5. This increased Zero Wing's overall combat power by a large margin. On the 5th day, Shifeng and Candlelight's members were working on the Blue Thunder flying ship. Feng Shihan, who was responsible for the Twin Towers Kingdom's defensive preparations, suddenly contacted Shifeng, guild leader. The Outer World's NPC army has started moving. Chapter 29:13 Blue Thunder flying ship. An army of more than 10 million NPCs? Shifeng was a little shocked when he read the detailed report Feng Shihan sent him. He had experienced wars between kingdoms and empires in his previous life. However, the kingdoms involved had pitted armies of 1 million NPCs at most against each other. These wars had also typically lasted over a month as the involved kingdoms conducted all sorts of battles to annex each other's land. This was because one of the conditions for a kingdom to become an empire was occupying a sufficiently large area of land. In the case of wars between empires, even if 2 empires waged a full-blown war with each other, the total number of NPCs participating would reach only 10 million. Yet just one of the Otherworld NPC army's several dozen detachments had a force of 10 million NPCs, equivalent to the combatants of 2 empires combined. At their rate of advance, they will reach the Steel Lion Fortress, which is the closest to the border, in 2 hours. Fire Dance and I are on our way there with 800,000 Tier 3 players and 50 Tier 4 players. We should arrive within an hour. As for the 2 other targeted locations, Aqua Rose has garrisoned Thundergorge City with 700,000 Tier 3 players and 70 Tier 4 players, while Gentle Snow has garrisoned the Redthorn Fortress with 1 million Tier 3 players and 100 Tier 4 players. As for the independent players, they will probably make their way to these 3 locations soon. The good news is that, according to our investigations, not many Outer World players are joining the battlefield here, so we shouldn't face as much trouble as the various empires. We only need to focus on the NPC army. Border strongholds generally only had small teleportation arrays, which limited the number of players that could get through. Hence, Feng Shihan could only have everyone hurry over to these strongholds on foot when faced with the Outer World NPC army's sudden invasion. Shifeng understood their current predicament. Unlike NPCs, players couldn't stay cooped up in a border stronghold forever. They needed to grind for levels and better equipment. Hence, in preparation for the imminent war, most players had chosen to bind their return point to the NPC cities located closest to the border strongholds. Only when the actual war began would they teleport to these NPC cities and travel to the border strongholds on their mounts. "I'll leave command to you all for now, but I'll hurry over to help afterward," Shifeng said. 1 hour. With his speed, he could definitely make it to the Steel Lion Fortress within an hour. Currently, the only thing the Blue Thunder flying ship lacked was the core magic array. So long as he finished engraving it, the mysterious iron flying ship would be complete. A mysterious iron flying ship could play a significant role in a defensive siege. Its importance even surpassed 2 or 3 ordinary Tier 5 existences. After Shi Feng finished speaking, he promptly disconnected the call and began engraving the core magic array. The core magic array comprised 3 advanced Grandmaster magic arrays. These magic arrays were so complex that even a basic Grandmaster magician wouldn't be able to construct them. This feat should also be beyond Shi Feng, who had gotten promoted to Grandmaster Magician just recently. However, after his concentration standard reached the Tier 5 peak rank, his brain's activity and computing power had improved drastically. In addition, the core array's 3 advanced Grandmaster magic arrays shared some similarities with some of the magic arrays passed down through the ancient god's legacy. These factors made it possible for Shi Feng to carve out the 3 advanced Grandmaster magic arrays. The past 3 failures occurred because of a mistake in the final fusion process. With my degree of control, the magic arrays carved should be perfect, so why can't I merge them? Is my control of magic arrays insufficient? Or is there another problem? Confusion filled Shi Feng's mind as he repeatedly inspected the core magic array's design. He had already succeeded in engraving the core magic array without pausing, yet he failed to activate the magic array when he tried injecting mana into it. This was definitely the first time he had encountered such a problem. Typically, if players succeeded in engraving a magic array, the magic array would activate once it received a supply of mana. Only if there was a problem with the magic array would the activation fail. Guild leader, I keep getting the feeling that this core magic array is very strange. Melancholic smile suddenly said as she looked at the core magic array. Each of the 3 magic arrays in it is meant to absorb one specific type of mana. So why are they forcing these 3 types of mana to fuse afterward? The 3 elements have their own characteristics. How could they be merged into one? Currently, Melancholic Smile was only half a step away from becoming a Grandmaster Magician. And because she didn't invest her time in combat, the amount of research she conducted into Grandmaster magic arrays surpassed even Shi Feng's. When she first looked at the Blue Thunder flying ship's core magic array, she already found the magic array strange. However, since the flying ship's design stated that the magic array should be constructed that way, she didn't voice her concerns. Now that the core magic array couldn't be activated, though, this proved that there was indeed a flaw in the design. However, Shi Feng simply smiled when he heard Melancholic Smile's questions. The various elements of mana indeed have their own operating principles, and merging them is impossible. However, that's not the case for this extraordinary magic array. After absorbing ambient mana, the magic array will first break up the operations of these different types of mana. And before they recover, the magic array will influence them to operate under a new set of operating principles. Although the change will last for only a brief moment, the core magic array can without a doubt change the operating principles of mana. Something like that is possible? Melancholic Smile was startled. In her opinion, the operating principles of mana were unchangeable. Take the way some players forcefully manipulated mana to use skills. While these players might succeed in activating their skills, the result would have significantly weaker effects. After all, the mana they manipulated was actively resisting them. For this reason, players who had reached Tier 4 would try to activate their skills and spells by following the operating principles of mana instead of forcing mana to do their bidding. As Shi Feng was about to explain further, he suddenly fell into a daze. So this is the Law of Destruction's true usage method. An ecstatic expression appeared on Shi Feng's face as realization dawned upon him. Recently, he had fallen into despair as he found himself stuck at Holy Annihilation's entry level. No matter how he tried to convert ambient mana into his own mana, the area he could influence only grew alongside his concentration. While this was indeed the correct way to manipulate mana, it wasn't the case if he was trying to make use of a world law. The reason Holy Annihilation could exhibit such devastating power was a complex destruction magic array designed for the mana technique. The fact that he could utilize the Heavenly Blue Saint's destruction magic array and merge it into various combat techniques and mana manipulation methods proved that he was starting to master the law of destruction. However, he still didn't truly understand how the destruction magic array operated. But Shi Feng understood everything now. The law of destruction's essence wasn't to make mana disappear. Instead, it was to break the operating principles of mana, causing mana to lose its original effects. Hence, if he wished to grasp the law of destruction fully, he shouldn't be relying on the destruction magic array to guide mana. Instead, he should rely on his mind to halt the operations of mana naturally. Of course, it was easier said than done. Not only did he need powerful mental strength, but he also had to reverse the operations of different types of mana precisely. Only by doing so could he perfectly stop the operation of mana. At this point, Shifeng finally understood why the core magic array wouldn't activate. So, it is because the strength of my mana is too weak? Shifeng smiled bitterly as he looked at the engraved magic array in front of him. Mana was required to control mana. If a person lacked mana, they naturally couldn't manipulate ambient mana. If one wished to break the operating principles of mana, one would need incredibly powerful mana. Liquid mana wouldn't suffice. One would need solid mana at the very least. Shifeng immediately began concentrating all of the mana within his body, condensing it into a grain of sand that sat on his palm. He then injected the grain of solid mana into the core magic array. Boom! Along with the sound of an explosion, the Blue Thunder flying ship's core magic array came to life. The ambient mana surrounding the flying ship then began flooding the core magic array, becoming fuel for the flying ship's engine. System, congratulations! You have successfully created the Blue Thunder flying ship. Forging proficiency increased by 100 million points. Level increased by 2. Simultaneously, all players who participated in the Blue Thunder flying ship's production received a corresponding amount of EXP and proficiency. Although the amount they received wasn't as exaggerated as Shifeng's, it was still significant nonetheless. Currently, though, nobody paid attention to the reward they just received. Instead, their eyes were all glued to the completed Blue Thunder flying ship. The Blue Thunder flying ship measured 500 meters from stem to stern, and it could carry up to 300 players at a time. It boasted 40 advanced magic elven cannons, each capable of launching attacks at the Tier 5 basic standard, and 12 floating crystal cannons, which could be used for both offense and defense. Offensively, the floating crystal cannons could launch attacks at the Tier 5 basic standard. Defensively, they could withstand attacks even from Tier 5 existences. In addition to these two types of cannons, the flying ship also had a main cannon capable of launching attacks at the Tier 5 intermediate standard. Lastly, the flying ship's flight speed was comparable to that of Tier 5 extraordinary flying mounts. Twin Towers Kingdom Steel Lion Fortress. Assembled atop the Steel Lion Fortress's 50-meter-tall steel walls were more than 300,000 level 150+, Tier 3 NPCs, all geared in level 150+ dark gold equipment. These NPCs were without a doubt the cream of the crop of the Twin Towers Kingdom's army. There were also close to 30 Tier 4 NPCs standing on the wall, and the one leading these Tier 4 NPCs was a level 200 Tier 4 Sky Knight. The Sky Knight was a man who appeared to be in his late 50s, clad in a complete set of fragmented legendary set equipment. The aura he exuded was comparable to that of an ordinary Tier 5 NPC. Apart from the fortress walls, there were also 24 Tier 4 NPCs chanting an incantation inside the fortress's core control room. Because of these magical class NPCs' manipulation, the fortress's defensive magic array, which used to have only one layer, was now a threefold magic array instead. Even a Tier 5 existence on a rampage wouldn't be able to destroy it. At most, the other party would merely expend some of the fortress's energy supply. A total of 30 magic cannon towers rose above the fortress, and more than 600 large destruction ballistas were set up on the fortress walls. In the sky, 10 flying ships hovered over the fortress, 9 advanced rank and 1 bronze rank. Alongside these flying ships were over 100 Tier 3 and Tier 4 flying mounts. The sight was simply spectacular and absolutely not something anyone would get to see very often. More than 2 million players gathered in the fortress, making the Steel Lion Fortress incredibly crowded. At this moment, though, none of the players inside the Steel Lion Fortress felt relaxed or excited. This was because some distance from the Steel Lion Fortress was an army of over 3 million NPCs, and the number of Tier 4 NPCs in that army exceeded 500. It came bearing various siege weapons, large catapults and advanced mana pulse cannons, which easily numbered more than 1,000. Meanwhile, hovering above this outerworld NPC army were more than 50 flying ships. 6 of them were bronze flying ships while the rest were advanced flying ships. In combination with the 500+ Tier 3 and Tier 4 flying mounts, they practically blotted out the entire sky. The disparity in combat power between the two sides was clear for all to see. Even the players who came to spectate and conduct a live broadcast of the battle wore gloomy expressions when they saw the Outer Worlds NPC army. On the Twin Towers Kingdom's forums, the live broadcasts caused an uproar among the kingdom's players. Is this the Outer World's real strength? Can we really hold the Twin Towers Kingdom? Although many of the Twin Towers Kingdom's players had heard bits of information regarding the battles that had taken place at the various empires, the most they got were rumors and some pictures. They didn't have a clear understanding of the Outer World NPC army's true might. Moreover, as players of another country, they previously considered these battles none of their business. However, after seeing the army outside the Steel Lion Fortress, they felt an indescribable sense of despair. The players standing inside the Steel Lion Fortress especially understood what a war between kingdoms and a war of worlds entailed. Battles between players were nothing compared to a war between worlds. The next moment, amid the anxiety and despair of the Twin Towers Kingdom's players, the commander of the Outer Worlds NPC army raised his right hand and swung it forward. Following his actions, both the war weapons on the ground and the flying ships and flying mounts in the sky began advancing. Activate all defenses. Everyone prepare for battle. The Steel Lion Fortress's commander Sky Knight Sepul shouted as he raised his long sword. In response to Sepul's command, the NPCs within the fortress armed the magic cannon towers and large destruction ballistas, knocked their bows and chanted incantations. Shortly afterward, the first exchange between the two sides took place. The sky instantly turned into a sea of flames as explosions of varying degrees shook the sky and the ground. The explosions were so deafening that all of the players inside the fortress felt their heads ring. After taking a look at the burning battlefield, Fang Shihan, who stood atop the fortress wall, turned to the players below the wall. Using a voice amplification spell, she ordered calmly, "Everyone, don't panic. Move as we've planned. Ranged players, head up the walls. Melee players, move to the agreed-upon defensive points. Once the magic barrier breaks, it will be your turn to attack with everything you've got. We must prevent the Outer Worlds NPCs from destroying the core magic array at all costs until the magic barrier recovers. So long as we can hold our ground, those Outer World NPCs will be forced to retreat sooner or later." The fortress's defensive magic array wasn't invincible. In the face of such a powerful offensive, it was only a matter of time before it shattered. Meanwhile, what players like themselves needed to do during this battle was protect the fortress's core magic array while the defensive magic array was down, and buy as much time as possible until the defensive magic array came back online. They would also try to kill as many Outer World NPCs as possible during this time. Once they repeated this cycle a few times, the Outer Worlds NPC army would eventually have to retreat. When Fang Shihan finished speaking, many of the players present calmed down, and confidence rekindled in their hearts. NPCs had a very difficult time getting resurrected, and even more so in an intense battle like this. However, it was a different story for players like themselves. If they died, they could be resurrected quickly and rejoin the battle. If there was a healer nearby, they could even be resurrected on the spot at the cost of some EXP. However, 3 minutes after Fang Shihan finished speaking, the sound of glass shattering entered everyone's ears. This sound originated from none other than the Steel Lion Fortress's defensive magic array. "Vanguard! Charge!" The Outer World Army's commander commanded. Immediately, the Outer World's Tier 3 NPCs began charging toward the Steel Lion Fortress in a frenzy. As for the Outer World's Tier 4 NPCs, they flew straight for the Fortress Lord's mansion, attracting the Steel Lion Fortress's Tier 4 NPCs to intercept them. "Trap those Tier 4 NPCs with magic barriers." Fang Shihan hurriedly commanded when she saw the hundreds of Tier 4 NPCs and flying mounts heading into the fortress. "All melee players, stop those Tier 3 NPCs from entering the fortress." At Fang Shihan's command, Zero Wings members promptly deployed the master magic barriers they had prepared, trapping more than half of the Outer World NPCs and flying mounts and isolating them into over a dozen different combat zones. Immediately afterward, the Tier 4 players cooperated with the fortress's Tier 4 NPCs to engage the Outer World's Tier 4 NPCs and flying mounts. As for the Tier 3 melee players, they cooperated with the fortress's Tier 3 NPCs to stop the Outer World's Tier 3 NPCs outside the wall. For a time, sounds of battle rang out from all over the Silver Lion Fortress, originating from individual battles, group battles and one-sided slaughters. On the ground, the fortress's Tier 3 players were holding up pretty well against the Outer World's Tier 3 NPCs. Although there was indeed a difference in levels and equipment between the two sides, the Tier 3 players managed to mitigate this difference by relying on their superior combat standards and coordination with other players. The difference in numbers between the two sides wasn't overwhelming either. So the fortress's Tier 3 players managed to trade at a relatively good ratio of 2-8 with the Outer World's Tier 3 NPCs, with 2 Outer World NPCs dying for every 8 fortress players. This was undoubtedly a beneficial outcome for the players. However, in the aerial battle, the Twin Towers Kingdom's side had fallen into an absolute disadvantage. Setting aside the difference in the number of flying ships and flying mounts the two sides possessed, just the difference in the number of Tier 4 combatants already posed an insurmountable gap. And worse, the fortress's magic cannon towers were hardly of any use against the Outer World's Tier 4 combatants. Moreover, if not for Fire Dance, Violet Cloud, and Yen Tianxing working together to hold off the leader of the Outer World Army's vanguard, a level 180 Tier 5 NPC, the advanced master barriers trapping and suppressing more than half of the Outer World's Tier 4 NPCs would have long since been shattered. As for the other Tier 4 experts, apart from those at the Void Realm standard or above, everyone else couldn't even put up a fight against the Outer World's Tier 4 NPCs. The difference in the number of Tier 4 combatants is too great. No wonder the superpowers in the empires are losing fights one after another. At this rate, it won't take more than 10 minutes before the core magic array is destroyed. After killing a level 180 Tier 4 Great Wizard, Fang Shihan glanced at Kola and White Feather, who were doing their best to stop attacks from reaching the Fortress Lord's mansion. When she saw they faced a dozen or so Tier 4 NPCs, she felt powerless. On her side, she only had to handle 3 level 180 Tier 4 NPCs by herself, so she could more or less cope. As for Kola and White Feather, they might not have any problem holding off a dozen or so Tier 4 NPCs by relying on their skills and techniques for now, but that would remain true only while they had skills to use. Not to mention, this wasn't all the Outer World army had to offer. It had over 500 Tier 4 NPCs in total and even Tier 5 NPCs leading it. The disparity between the Twin Towers Kingdom's army and the Outer World's army was utterly demoralizing. After some more time passed, 8 of the Twin Towers Kingdom's Tier 4 NPCs and more than 20 Tier 4 players fell. In contrast, the Outer World army lost only 6 Tier 4 NPCs, 3 of which were Fang Shihan's kills. The stark difference between the two sides plunged the Tier 4 players into despair. "Keep fighting. We must not retreat on our first battle," Fang Shihan bellowed when she saw her people's demoralized expressions. "Even if we die, we must make these Outer World NPCs pay a sufficient price." Fang Shihan wasn't too surprised that the Steel Iron Fortress's defenses were crumbling. The disparity between the Outer World's army and the Twin Towers Kingdom's army was simply too immense. The only way the Twin Towers Kingdom could emerge victorious was by whittling down the Outer World's army through multiple battles at multiple strongholds. However, the first battle was also when the Twin Towers Kingdom's combat power was at its peak. If the Twin Towers Kingdom failed to deplete a significant portion of the Outer World's army's forces, the subsequent battles would be even more difficult. As soon as Fang Shihan finished speaking, however, the Outer World army's commander, who rode on one of the bronze flying ships, stood up and suddenly released a frightening aura that enveloped the Steel Lion Fortress. Upon coming into contact with this aura, all the players within the fortress felt their heartbeats accelerate and their bodies grow heavier. It was evident that the Outer World army's commander no longer intended to watch from the sidelines and would now enter the battlefield. A level 200 Tier 5 Holy Grail Knight? A solemn expression appeared on Fang Shihan's face when she saw the enemy commander walking step by step in the air. The aura the enemy commander radiated was significantly stronger than what the enemy's vanguard leader radiated. Moreover, he even wielded a legendary greatsword. The enemy commander probably stood at the top even among Tier 5 existences. If the Steel Lion Fortress's defenders had to clash against such an existence, their defensive line would probably crumble in an instant. When the other players saw the enemy commander taking the field himself, none of them had any doubts that this siege battle was over. However, just as the enemy Holy Grail Knight arrived above the Steel Lion Fortress and was about to take action, a deafening roar suddenly came from the distant sky. Before anyone could turn toward the source of the noise, A dark blue behemoth arrived in the airspace above the fortress like a lightning bolt. Both players and NPCs present were startled by the dark blue behemoth's sudden appearance. A flying ship? Is that really a flying ship? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The flying ship above them was simply massive. Even the bronze flying ships, which measured close to 200 meters in length, looked like infants beside the dark blue behemoth. Moreover, this dark blue behemoth distorted the space around it just by hovering in place. The mana within and around the Steel Lion Fortress gathered fervently around this dark blue behemoth, and even the Outer World Army's vanguard commander had the mana in his mana domain drawn away. As the dark blue behemoth began descending toward the fortress, a man wearing a black cloak walked to the bow of the flying ship. Upon seeing this man, the players in the fortress immediately burst into cheers. "Guild leader! You're finally here," Fang Shihan said in a disgruntled tone as she looked at the man standing atop the dark blue behemoth. Feng had promised to arrive at the Steel Lion Fortress before the battle began, yet he showed up only after they had been fighting for some time. "Sorry for the long wait, everyone," Feng said apologetically as he looked at Fang Shihan and the others. He then shifted his gaze to the Outer World NPC army and smiled, saying, "Now that I'm here, leave the rest to me." Chapter 29:14, Law Technique? Upon hearing Feng's words, Fire Dance, Cola, Violet Cloud, Yen Tianxing and the other longtime members of Zero Wing felt an indescribable sense of relief and excitement. "Guild leader, our situation is terrible. The enemy's air power is too strong," Fang Shihan said in a helpless tone as she pointed at the enemy's Tier 5 commander and the 30-plus flying ships. "The fortress's defensive magic array still needs more than 10 minutes to recover. I'm afraid we won't last that long." Although Feng's arrival meant that they had someone to hold back the enemy commander, they still had to contend with hundreds of Tier 4 NPCs and flying mounts when their side had less than 100 Tier 4 combatants. Although they had the fortress's magic array's support, which mitigated the effects of the Tier 5 NPCs' mana domains and suppressed the enemy Tier 4 NPCs, they were still at an absolute disadvantage. Not to mention the Steel Lion Fortress's commander, the level 200 Tier 4 Sky Knight Sepul, currently had less than 50% of his HP remaining. If not for the many Tier 3 and Tier 4 healers supporting him, he would have long since fallen to the 20-plus level 180 Tier 4 NPCs ganging up on him. "Relax." After looking at Fang Shihan, Feng turned to the Blue Thunder flying ship and smiled, saying, "If it's air power, we don't lack any either." "We don't lack any?" Fang Shihan glanced at the Blue Thunder flying ship and then turned to survey the enemy's fleet of flying ships, her worries not easing in the slightest. Naturally, she knew that a mysterious iron flying ship was powerful and that it could go up against Tier 5 combatants. However, the enemy's Tier 5 combatants were by no means weak. Moreover, several dozen Tier 4 NPCs had constructed a summoning array some distance behind the enemy's commander. A monster summoned by several dozen Tier 4 NPCs definitely wouldn't be weak. There was even a high possibility it would be a Tier 5 legendary monster. No sooner had Fang Shihan finished speaking than those several dozen Tier 4 NPCs completed their incantations. A gigantic bone dragon then emerged from the summoning array, its 500-meter-long body matching the Blue Thunder flying ship in size. The bone dragon also had a wingspan of 1,000 meters. When this bone dragon appeared and let loose a roar, the intense shockwave it generated made all the Tier 3 combatants on the battlefield feel lightheaded. Ancient Bone Dragon. Undead, Legendary. Level 180 HP 200 billion. Upon seeing the Ancient Bone Dragon statistics, the players inside the Steel Lion Fortress gasped reflexively. Even the players spectating the battle through the Twin Towers Kingdom's forums were dumbfounded, many people spitting out the drink in their mouth. This was the first time any of the Twin Towers Kingdom's players saw a legendary monster statistics, and they all couldn't help despairing. Even the Tier 4 players in the fortress revealed a bitter smile. Setting aside the wide-range attacks the Bone Dragon could execute with its massive body, just its 200 billion HP was more than enough to make any Tier 4 player lose hope. After all, the Ancient Bone Dragon could recover 2% of its HP every 5 seconds due to its battle recovery. In other words, it could regenerate 4 billion HP every 5 seconds. Combined with its Tier 5 defense, even 100 Tier 4 players attacking with everything they had wouldn't be enough to kill it. "It's over. We're dead for sure this time," Many of the Tier 3 players in the Steel Lion Fortress lost their fighting spirit as they looked at the ancient bone dragon in the sky. Shifeng's arrival was indeed a huge help to them. However, along with his arrival, the enemy forces had become even stronger. Although Shifeng was a Tier 5 sword saint, he couldn't go up against one Tier 5 NPC and one Tier 5 legendary monster simultaneously. Not to mention, the enemy's Tier 5 commander was far from ordinary, clad in a complete set of fragmented legendary set equipment and even wielding a legendary greatsword. He was a top-ranking existence even among Tier 5 existences, and definitely not someone current Tier 5 players could contend with. When Fang Shihan saw the ancient bone dragon, her complexion also turned very ugly. She had never imagined that the Outer World NPCs could summon an actual Tier 5 legendary monster. This ancient bone dragon was much stronger than the 9-headed world snake the Outer World players summoned previously. The summoning array the Outer World players had used was something similar to the Divine Beast's Descent magic array. The monster summoned wasn't an actual monster but a magical illusion. So long as one heavily damaged the summoning array, one would dispel the illusion. It was a different story for actual summon monsters. The only way to get rid of a summon monster was by killing either the monster or the monster's summoner. However, there was no specific summoner in a group summoning. Unless one killed all of the summoners involved, the summoned creature would remain, obedient to the summoner's commands. Before the Steel Lion Fortress's players could overcome their despair, the Outer World's Tier 5 commander, Los Ferret, pointed at the Steel Lion Fortress and ordered, "Attack! Kill all of the natives." At Los Ferret's command, the ancient bone dragon, along with the 30-plus advanced flying ships and 6 bronze flying ships, began bombarding the Steel Lion Fortress. The ancient bone dragon used the Tier 5 spell Hell Lotus and showered the Steel Lion Fortress with crimson flames so hot that they incinerated space itself. Meanwhile, the flying ships fired all their cannons, raining hundreds of destructive beams on the fortress. Boom! The resulting explosion was so devastating that it was audible even tens of thousands of yards away. The consequent shockwave ravaged the area within 3,000 yards of the fortress. Upon seeing this attack, the Outer World NPCs charging at the Steel Lion Fortress revealed joyous expressions. If the Steel Lion Fortress received such an attack without its defensive magic array, all of the fortress's inhabitants would disappear without a trace. However, when the smoke enveloping the fortress dissipated, the Outer World NPCs suddenly fell silent. How is this possible? The Outer World's Tier 3 NPCs stared at the sight before them with dumbfounded expressions. In fact, even the people inside the Steel Lion Fortress were stunned by the situation, their minds boggled. Before anyone realized it, a gigantic magic barrier had formed around the Steel Lion Fortress and blocked all the attacks from the flying ships and the ancient bone dragon. Let alone annihilating the fortress's inhabitants, the flying ships and the ancient bone dragon had even failed to scratch the fortress walls. However, before anyone could snap out of their daze, the barrier enveloping the fortress suddenly disappeared. 6 crystalline spheres the size of a small house then flew toward the Blue Thunder flying ship and hovered around it. That flying ship created that barrier just now? Are you kidding me? Is that really a flying ship? How can it stop a legendary monster's Tier 5 spell? Be it the players or NPCs inside the Steel Lion Fortress, all of them currently had their mouths hanging wide open as they stared at the Blue Thunder flying ship. After all, the flying ship's performance had shattered their notions of flying ships. The Blue Thunder flying ship's defensive capabilities practically rivaled a mobile fortress's. At this time, even Fang Shihan, who knew the specifics of the situation, was rendered speechless. She had no idea that a mysterious iron flying ship could be that strong. Of those present, only Shifeng found the situation normal. The Grey Thunder flying ship might only be a mysterious iron flying ship, but its technological content exceeded that of the average mysterious iron flying ship. Its usage of mana was particularly exceptional. If not for its inadequate materials and power source, it could easily become a secret silver flying ship. Now that you're done attacking, it's our turn now. Pointing at the Outer World's NPC army, Shifeng commanded, "Beat them up." Along with Shifeng's command, the Zero Wing members seated on the Blue Thunder flying ship eagerly revved up the engine's output to maximum. Subsequently, the flying ship's 40 advanced magic elven cannons, 12 floating crystal cannons, and thunder of destruction main cannon fired at the enemy flying ships and flying mounts and the ancient bone dragon simultaneously. For a moment, countless lightning arcs and beams of light filled the battlefield, making it seem as if the heavens were doling out divine retribution. The ancient bone dragon and outer world NPCs reacted quickly and activated defensive spells to protect themselves. However, apart from the ancient bone dragon's defensive barrier, the defensive barriers conjured for the flying ships and flying mounts all shattered without exception. When the barrage ended, several dozen flying mounts crashed to the ground. The advanced flying ships also suffered severe damage, their mobility plummeting significantly. With how much damage they took from just one bombardment, they would probably fall after another 3 or 4. As for the bronze flying ships, although they didn't take any serious damage, their armor's durability still plummeted by a significant margin. After the Blue Thunder flying ship ended its barrage, everyone on the battlefield turned to stare at it, petrified. Isn't this thing a little too strong? So this is Zero Wing's trump card? The Steel Lion Fortress's players found their minds stagnating as they took in the tattered state of the Outer World Army's air units. Just a moment ago, they were clearly at an overwhelming disadvantage in air power. However, the Blue Thunder flying ship had instantly turned the tables with its arrival. This situation was simply unbelievable. When Kola looked at the distant Blue Thunder flying ship, his eyes glowed and his mouth watered. He then turned to Shifeng and asked, "Guild leader, when can I buy one?" Compared to flying mounts, traveling across the continent in the Blue Thunder flying ship would be a much more wonderful experience. "You'll get your chance eventually," Shifeng said, chuckling when he saw Kola's excitement. "However, this thing needs 10 people to pilot. It's not something you can pilot alone." When Shifeng finished speaking, the Zero Wing members present were all thrilled. After all, based on Shifeng's words, the guild would eventually sell the Blue Thunder flying ship to its members once the flying ship was available in larger numbers. This meant that all of them had an opportunity to own this steel behemoth. And even if they couldn't ride it alone, they could simply form a team to do so. However, shortly after Shifeng finished speaking, the enemy commander, who had not taken any action thus far, suddenly turned to Shifeng. At this time, though, the contempt in Los Ferret's eyes had disappeared. There was even a faint smile on his face. "You are an exceptional heaven-blessed individual," Los Ferret said as he lifted his greatsword and rested it on his shoulder. Smiling, he asked, "May I know your name?" "Black Flame," Shifeng replied calmly. Although Black Flame wasn't his real ID, he had long since gotten accustomed to using it. Moreover, the outer world knew of only Black Flame and not Yifeng. "Black Flame." Los Ferret, who appeared to be in his 50s, nodded. He then earnestly introduced himself. "I am Los Ferret, the Commander-in-Chief of the God's Domain Crusade Army's 19th Corps and one of the 17 stars of the Holy Grail. You are qualified to be my enemy." After Los Ferret finished speaking, the strength of his mana domain suddenly increased. Now, even the fortress's magic arrays couldn't nullify it. The instant Los Ferret's mana domain enveloped the Steel Lion Fortress, everyone inside the fortress felt their bodies become significantly heavier. Now the fortress's Tier 3 combatants even had difficulty lifting their heads. A scorching heat also blanketed their bodies as if they were standing in a burning hell. Even Fire Dance, who had an 8-piece epic set equipment equipped and wielded a legendary weapon, felt immense pressure on her body. She would be fortunate to exhibit even 60% of her usual combat power. And as a result of this suppression, she became even less of an opponent for the enemy's level 180 Tier 5 Vanguard leader in front of her. One of the 17 stars of the Holy Grail? Shifeng grew more cautious after hearing Los Ferret's introduction. Although he had never heard of the 17 stars of the Holy Grail, God's Domain had an official ranking list known as the 10 Saints, which represented the 10 strongest combatants recognized by the War God's Temple. Every one of these 10 saints was rumored to have demigod-level combat power. Shifeng guessed that Los Ferret was probably on par with the 10 saints. Based on his observation of Los Ferret's mana domain, he could tell that the other party had already mastered a world law. The only thing holding the NPC back from reaching Tier 6 was his concentration. Nevertheless, with a legendary weapon in hand, Los Ferret should be a powerhouse even among demigods. However, although Los Ferret possessed a powerful mana domain, it had no effect on Shifeng whatsoever. Immediately, Shifeng unleashed his own mana domain, canceling out Los Ferrets and even suppressing the NPC slightly. Let's fight. Let me see how powerful you heaven-blessed individuals are. Los Ferret said, his body suddenly splitting into more than 100 doppelgangers that charged at Shifeng from different directions. Tier 5 skill Shadowlight Kill. After activating Shadow Kill, Los Ferret spun and swung his great sword. Tier 5 skill Great Holy Cross. Tier 5 skill Draconic Stars. Immediately, Los Ferret's doppelgangers transformed into gigantic crosses that pierced through space. Each of these crosses then split and transformed into several dozen serpentine dragons. Several thousand serpentine dragons flew toward Shifeng, their large numbers making it impossible to dodge or block them all. He combined 3 Tier 5 skills. Fire Dance and the others were startled when they saw Los Ferret's attack. 4 true expert players combining the effects of skills was a must-learn technique. However, the higher the tier of the skills, the more difficult combining them would be. Currently, even domain realm experts like Fire Dance and Yen Tianqing could just barely combine 2 Tier 4 skills. Yet Los Ferret had combined 3 Tier 5 skills. Los Ferret's combat standard was simply unprecedented. Every addition to a skill combination would double the power of the combined attack. Los Ferret's combined Tier 5 skills could exhibit quadruple the power of a standard Tier 5 skill. Moreover, Los Ferret was also wielding a legendary weapon. These 2 factors would probably deter even a Tier 5 dragon from receiving Los Ferret's attack. Amazing. When Shifeng perceived the several thousand serpentine dragons flying toward him, he was awed. If this were before his fight with the scholar, he would definitely rank Los Ferret number 1 when it came to the usage of skills out of all the NPCs he knew. However, while Los Ferret's attack might seem unstoppable in the eyes of other players, that wasn't the case for Shifeng. After Shifeng's concentration reached the Tier 5 peak standard, his brain's processing speed had undergone another qualitative transformation. Previously, he could only increase his brain's processing speed 2-fold. Now he could increase it 4-fold. This was also the part that made mental strength masters powerful. Nonetheless, he still didn't dare take the approaching serpentine dragons lightly. Immediately, he unsheathed the Light of 2 Worlds and executed a horizontal slash. Spatial slash. Swords Transmigration. Shifeng had gotten promoted to Tier 5 only recently, so he had hardly any Tier 5 skills that could counter Los Ferret's attack. His only option to offset this shortcoming was to rely on his weapons, equipment and techniques. The Light of 2 Worlds was one of the 10 great legendary weapons. It was among the strongest legendary weapons in existence, not something ordinary legendary weapons could hope to match. The next moment, with Shifeng as the center, a golden lotus bloomed on the battlefield, the petals of the lotus nullifying the energy making up the serpentine dragons. In the blink of an eye, the several thousand serpentine dragons vanished from the battlefield. Upon seeing that his first attack had failed, Los Ferret immediately took a different approach and transformed into a streak of light shooting toward Shifeng. Tier 5 skill Shadowlight Steps. Shadowlight Steps not only provided Los Ferret with a brief moment of invulnerability but also increased his attack speed and destructive power. After appearing in front of Shifeng and swinging his greatsword down at him, Los Ferret also let out a roar. Tier 5 skill Voice of the Soul. When activated, Voice of the Soul would stun all enemies within a radius of several hundred yards, causing their reaction speed to plummet. The skill also dealt a heavy blow to their souls. However, Los Ferret still wasn't done, even after activating Voice of the Soul. He also activated World Strike, an additional skill that came with his greatsword. It allowed him to launch an attack at the Tier 6 peak standard and had a 1-hour cooldown. Even a Tier 6 existence would have to be wary of the combination of these 3 skills, what more a Tier 5 player like Shifeng. However, as Los Ferret took action, Shifeng activated Divine Steps and instantly swapped positions with a doppelganger located over 1,000 yards away from him, dodging the NPC's Voice of the Soul. Unfortunately, as all 36 of his doppelgangers were still within range of Los Ferret's World Strike, Shifeng had no choice but to counter with World Breaker. Boom! An explosion took place in midair, and everyone on the battlefield gaped in shock when they saw the aftermath of the clash between Shifeng and Los Ferret. The sky above the Steel Lion Fortress had turned into a dark, empty void. Some of the advanced and bronze flying ships, unfortunate enough to be caught within this void, even turned to dust. That is a powerful sword you have there. Not only did it break my world strike, but it even injured me, Los Ferret exclaimed as he looked at the light of two worlds in Shifeng's hand. The great sword he wielded was top tier even among legendary weapons. Yet even after he activated his greatsword's strongest skill, his attack still lost to Shifeng's. This was simply unbelievable. Although he lost less than 10% of his HP from the exchange, this was still an astonishing outcome. After all, ever since he equipped the Holy Star set, he had never received so much damage from a single attack until now. Meanwhile, the players inside the fortress were dumbfounded by the outcome of the clash between Shifeng and Los Ferret. In their opinion, this was no longer a battle between humans but a battle between gods. When Los Ferret executed his earlier attack, most of them already thought they would die. Fortunately, Shifeng had shattered the attack. Otherwise, the Steel Lion Fortress would probably have disappeared from the Twin Towers Kingdom. You overpraise me. When Shifeng saw that Los Ferret had received some damage, he immediately followed up on his small victory with Golden Soul, elevating his soul to the Tier 6 standard. He then swapped positions with the doppelganger closest to Los Ferret and swung the Light of Two Worlds at the NPC. Holy Annihilation. Now that Shifeng's concentration was elevated to Tier 6 and he understood the true way to utilize the Law of Destruction, he executed Holy Annihilation with much greater proficiency than before. However, when executing this attack, Shifeng didn't use the Heavenly Blue Saint's Destruction Magic Array. Instead, he tried using his own mana to break the operations of the ambient mana. Originally, when Shifeng's concentration was only at the Tier 5 peak standard, accomplishing this feat would have been incredibly difficult. However, after activating Golden Soul, his control over and perception of mana had undergone a qualitative transformation. This, in turn, reduced the difficulty of the challenge significantly, turning the impossible possible. The next moment, the space Shifeng's sword passed through transformed into an empty void, the power of his attack having reached the Tier 6 intermediate standard already. A law technique? Los Ferret was startled when he saw the destroyed space. As someone who had already mastered a world law, integrating the world law into his swordsmanship was something he had always dreamed of. However, accomplishing this feat was simply too difficult, which was why even demigods could normally only rely on mana techniques as a guide to make use of world laws. However, Shifeng currently wasn't relying on any magic arrays as a guide. He was making use of a world law purely with his own strength. The power one could exhibit this way was much greater than what one could exhibit by relying on a mana technique. This was because a mana technique was a fixed sword technique. If one had to rely on mana techniques to make use of world laws, one could use only these specific mana techniques. However, if one could freely make use of a world law, then regardless of what technique one used, all of one's techniques would carry the power of the world law. The difference in flexibility between the two was like heaven and earth. Of course, the law technique Shifeng currently displayed was extremely crude, and he could use only a small portion of the Law of Destruction's power. Nonetheless, Los Ferret dared not act recklessly against Shifeng's attack. He immediately swung his greatsword. Mana technique Burning Sea. Boom. When the two swords collided, a vast void and a sea of flames appeared in the sky once more. The terrifying shockwave the collision generated even obliterated the Tier 3 combatants nearby, while those standing farther away got sent flying. Subsequently, the clangor of swords clashing rang out in the sky time after time. Apart from some Tier 4 individuals with incredibly high basic attributes, everyone else dared not stay anywhere near Shifeng and Los Ferret's battle. The clash between Shifeng and Los Ferret continued for more than a minute, the deafening explosions numbing everyone's mind. However, the more Shifeng fought, the fiercer his attacks became. Despite Los Ferret doing his best to avoid a head-on clash, Shifeng took the initiative to do the exact opposite. Shifeng was relying on this intense life-and-death battle to familiarize himself with the process of breaking the operations of mana. As more time passed, Los Ferret gradually fell into a disadvantage, his HP decreasing continuously. Only after 2 minutes had gone by and the effect of Shifeng's Golden Soul disappeared did Los Ferret regain the upper hand. Nevertheless, Los Ferret still couldn't put an end to the battle. This was because even after losing the ability to use his law technique, Shifeng could still rely on Holy Annihilation to use the Law of Destruction. Hence, he had no problem clashing with Los Ferret. Moreover, both of them had healers supporting them. Unless one of them made a fatal mistake, neither was unlikely to die. In the meantime, the Blue Thunder flying ship was deeply entangled with the ancient bone dragon. However, as the Blue Thunder flying ship had a lot of cannons, it managed to pin down the ancient bone dragon while shooting down the enemy's flying ships and flying mounts one after another. When Los Ferret saw another bronze flying ship crash to the ground, his eyes twitched involuntarily. At this point, his army had already lost 4 bronze flying ships and over 20 advanced flying ships. The loss of flying mounts was even worse. These things were practically mobile targets in front of the Blue Thunder flying ship. And worse, the Steel Lion Fortress's defensive barrier was gradually taking shape once more. Evidently, the fortress's defensive magic array had already been fully reactivated. After the Tier 5 Vanguard leader repelled Fire Dance and saw that the fortress's defensive barrier was reforming, he looked toward Los Ferret and said, "Lord Ferret, we cannot continue like this. Once the defensive barrier is up again, we'll be very passive." At the Vanguard leader's words, Los Ferret gritted his teeth and commanded, "Everyone retreat." Obedient to Los Ferret's command, the Outer World's NPC army, which only had around 2 million NPCs remaining, began an orderly retreat from the Steel Lion Fortress. Los Ferret, the Vanguard leader, and the ancient bone dragon served as the rear guard, preventing Shifeng and the Blue Thunder flying ship from giving chase. After the Outer World NPCs opened a teleportation portal and left the battlefield, Los Ferret and the Vanguard leader promptly retreated into the portal as well, leaving the ancient bone dragon behind. The summoning array used to summon the ancient bone dragon could keep it under control for only a certain period. After this period was over, the ancient bone dragon would regain its freedom. Hence they might as well leave it behind and have it pin down Shifeng and the others. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Once the Outer World's NPC army retreated, Shifeng and the others spent around 20 minutes killing the ancient bone dragon. When the level 180 legendary monster died, Fire Dance and the others leveled up once. The monster's death also awarded Zero Wing with 1 fragmented legendary weapon, over a dozen level 180 epic weapons and equipment, and several dozen legendary materials. Upon seeing the loot, the Tier 3 and Tier 4 players belonging to other guilds couldn't help growing envious. Afterward, Shifeng immediately rode the Blue Thunder flying ship to the Twin Towers Kingdom's 2 other battlefronts. The Redthorn Fortresses and Thunder Gorge City's situations were much better than the Steel Lion Fortresses. This was especially true for Thunder Gorge City. Because Aqua Rose was now a Tier 5 Grand Wizard, the Outer World NPC army that attacked Thunder Gorge City received a resounding defeat, similar to the army that attacked the Steel Lion Fortress. As for the Redthorn Fortress, although the defenders here suffered somewhat terrible losses, they still managed to repulse the enemy. With the successful defense of these 3 strongholds, the Twin Towers Kingdom's players exploded with joy. Meanwhile, news of this astonishing outcome immediately spread across the entire continent, causing a sensation in God's domain. Chapter 29:15 Tides have turned Dark Night Empire, Thousand Night City. Although nightfall was still several hours away, players already flooded the city's streets. In addition, more than 70% of the city's players were level 140+, Tier 3 experts. At this time, though, all of these experts had nervous and solemn expressions on their faces. The reason for their sullen mood was the consecutive failures to defend several of the Dark Knight Empire's border fortresses and cities. By now, the Empire's players had no choice but to retreat to the largest border city in the south to fight the Outer World's NPCs and players. Currently, over 8 million Tier 3 players and 200 Tier 4 experts had gathered in the city, more than what one would normally see even in Dark Knight City. Starlink's residence, Guild Leader's office. They won. Lu Tiandi was stunned when he read the report regarding the Twin Towers Kingdom his subordinate sent him. The Outer World's NPC army's abrupt decision to begin its invasion of the Twin Towers Kingdom had been Lu Tiandi's dearest wish. With just the NPC forces available in the Twin Towers Kingdom and Starmoon Kingdom, there was no way the Twin Towers Kingdom could repel the Outer World's NPC army. After all, there were almost no Tier 5 NPCs in these 2 kingdoms. In contrast, the Outer World's NPC army had multiple Tier 5 NPCs leading it. In Lu Tiandi's opinion, even with Shifeng's presence, the Twin Towers Kingdom would be fortunate to defend even one fortress, and the kingdom's fall was inevitable. Currently, out of all the Eastern Continent's empires fighting against the Outer World forces, Only the Fire Dragon Empire managed to repulse the Outer World NPC army's invasion. Nonetheless, it had still lost 2 fortresses and had to resort to guerrilla warfare to stop the NPC army's advance completely. Yet he was now told that Zero Wing had successfully defended not only the Steel Lion Fortress but also the Redthorn Fortress and Thundergorge City. Zero Wing had stopped the Outer World NPC army in its tracks at the Twin Towers Kingdom's borders. 5 first-rate guild leaders standing nearby similarly looked dumbfounded, having never thought that Zero Wing would succeed in repelling the Outer World's NPC army even without the support of their 5 guilds. Moreover, Zero Wing had even dealt significant damage to the Outer World's NPC army. This victory also meant that the guild and independent players who had participated in the defense would earn a fortune. After all, without the interference of enemy air units, they would have a much easier time killing the enemy's Tier 3 NPCs. Guild leader, according to our investigations, Zero Wing's Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose have both gotten promoted to Tier 5. Moreover, the main reason behind Zero Wing's successful defense is its Blue Thunder flying ship. That single flying ship has the power to suppress the Outer World Army's air power, Ikue said, a hint of envy appearing on his face when he mentioned the Blue Thunder flying ship. If not for that flying ship, Zero Wing wouldn't have been able to retain those 3 strongholds even with 3 Tier 5s. The Blue Thunder flying ship? After watching a battle video showing the Blue Thunder flying ship's performance, Lu Tiandi turned to Ikue and ordered in a determined tone, "Do everything you can to find out how Zero Wing acquired this flying ship. So long as we can get one ourselves, resisting the Outer World's NPC army will no longer be a problem." The main reason why the Dark Knight Empire failed to defend its border fortresses and cities was its inadequate air power. As soon as the fortresses and cities' defensive magic arrays fell, the Outer World NPC army's air units had destroyed the core magic arrays very quickly, depriving the defenders of their advantages. However, the Blue Thunder flying ship had easily solved this problem. Not only did the flying ship have the power to pin down a legendary monster, but it even pummeled the Outer World's air fleet to the ground while doing so. It was basically a tyrant of the skies. Lu Tiandi wasn't the only one with designs on the Blue Thunder flying ship. After seeing its performance, the various superpowers and even the Outer World's player forces began looking into how Zero Wing acquired this flying behemoth. Countless spies began sneaking into Starmoon Kingdom and Zero Wing. Lu Tiandi had gone the extra mile, offering 100 million credits to anyone who could provide detailed information and the source of the flying ship. He had even offered 100 billion credits to anyone who could get a complete Blue Thunder flying ship for Starlink. The bounty Lu Tiandi offered instantly caused an uproar among God's Domain's players. After all, the average person wouldn't even see 10 million credits in their lifetime. Starmoon Kingdom, Starmoon City. Guild leader, many of our trading firm's core members fell for Starlink's temptations and sold all information regarding the Blue Thunder flying ship to Starlink. Melancholic Smile said in an embarrassed tone as she handed a list of names to Shifeng. Many of these people are even old members who have been with Candlelight since its establishment. Yet this time, the Blue Thunder flying ship's construction required a lot of manpower. Although all the participants had been required to sign a confidentiality agreement and given a significant amount of remuneration for silence, some people still fell for Starlink's inducement. Now, everyone knew of the Blue Thunder flying ship's specifications and that the flying ship's design originated from Shifeng. At Melancholic Smile's words, Fire Dance, who stood beside Shifeng, chuckled and said, "That's nothing." Quite a few of Zero Wing's members even tried to steal the flying ship itself when it was getting repaired in the Sky Spring City residence. If not for Blackie and the others taking turns guarding it, these people might have even succeeded. The Blue Thunder flying ship wasn't bound to any specific player. Although its activation required a key, storing it into an epic spatial bag didn't. It's 100 billion credits after all. Even I'm tempted to sell the flying ship, let alone them, Shifeng said, chuckling. It's impossible to stop others from targeting the flying ship. Letting someone carry it isn't an option either. The only thing we can do is strengthen the security around it. Piloting the Blue Thunder flying ship required a minimum of 10 people. While having someone carry it in their bag might prevent theft to a certain degree, nobody knew when the Outer World's NPC army would strike again. Should the Outer World's NPC army return and the person holding the flying ship just so happen to be preoccupied with something, Zero Wing would be put into a very awkward situation. I've already stationed 4 Tier 4 fine gold guards inside the flying ship's control room. Without orders from you or one of the vice guild leaders, they will not allow anyone to pilot it, Fang Shihan said, nodding in agreement with Shifeng's words. Even if someone inside the guild plans to steal the flying ship, they will need to deal with those 4 guards first. The Tier 4 fine gold guards possessed combat power at the Tier 4 peak standard. Each of them could take on 2 or 3 ordinary Tier 4 players easily. Only Tier 4 players at the Void Realm standard and fully geared in epic equipment could fight one-on-one with these guards. Tier 3 players stood no chance whatsoever. By the way, how's the production of the Blue Thunder flying ships and Flame Beast puppets coming along? Shifeng asked, melancholic smile. Even Tier 5 combatants could do very little to affect the state of the current War of Worlds. To defend against the Outer Worlds NPC army adequately, Zero Wing would need a large number of Blue Thunder flying ships and Flame Beast puppets. The Flame Beast puppets' production difficulty and manpower requirement are lower, so we've already manufactured 3 of them thus far. We just need to engrave the core runes and magic arrays to complete them, Melancholic Smile reported. As for the Blue Thunder flying ship, we have encountered some difficulties. With the materials we have on hand, we can produce 3 more flying ships. However, because of the information leak, the various powers have started purchasing the production materials as well, so subsequent manufacturing will be a problem. In that case, build those 3 flying ships first and then focus on producing the Flame Beast puppets, Shifeng said after giving the matter some thought. The Outer Worlds 19th Army Corps had attacked only 3 locations in the Twin Towers Kingdom. With the 19th Army Corps' strength, it could attack 5 or 6 locations simultaneously if it wanted to. If that happened, Zero Wing wouldn't be able to defend all of the targeted locations in time. At least 3 Blue Thunder flying ships were needed to defend the Twin Towers Kingdom's borders adequately. Guild leader, the Secret Pavilion, contacted us earlier, asking us to help them using the Blue Thunder flying ship. In return, they are willing to pay us 100,000 gold coins and 300,000 magic crystals as remuneration, Fang Shihan said as she forwarded the Secret Pavilion's request for help to Shifeng. She then added, because of the rewards we gave out to players who managed to kill the Outer World NPCs, Zero Wing cities and Ancient Rock cities' incomes have been greatly reduced. If we help the Secret Pavilion a few times, it will relieve a lot of the financial pressure on the guild. Previously, Shifeng had basically wiped out all of Zero Wing's liquid funds to obtain the 2 designs. The guild was also spending a lot of money to strengthen Ancient Rock City and recruit more members. After pondering on the matter for a moment, Shifeng said, "We can help them, but we currently cannot afford to mobilize the Blue Thunder flying ship. Tell them that we are willing to send at most 3 Flame Beast puppets. Also, in addition to the coins and magic crystals, we will need 20 magic elven stones, 100 Titan gold ingots, and 107 luminaries crystals as payment." The Blue Thunder flying ship was of utmost importance to the Twin Towers Kingdom's defense right now, so it definitely couldn't be sent outside the kingdom's borders. However, if the Secret Pavilion was only looking to defend a fortress or city, 3 Flame Beast puppets would more than suffice as reinforcements. After all, Tier 5 combatants were rare even among the Outer Worlds NPC army. Although the addition of 3 Tier 5 combatants might not let the Secret Pavilion achieve a landslide victory, the Secret Pavilion wouldn't have any trouble defending its fortresses and cities. "I'll notify them right away," Fang Shihan said, nodding. Although Shifeng's conditions were slightly more demanding, they were preferable to losing a fortress or city. After all, losing an area's stronghold to the Outer World NPCs also meant losing access to the area's resources. Once the Outer World NPCs captured an area, no native player would dare set foot there to harvest resources anymore. Just as Fang Shihan expected, the Secret Pavilion agreed to Shifeng's conditions without hesitation. The Secret Pavilion also asked that Zero Wing come over as soon as possible, as the Outer Worlds NPC army had already started moving. The NPC army would take another 1 or 2 days at most, before it began its assault on another one of the Fire Wing Empire's NPC cities. In response to the Secret Pavilion's request, Shifeng immediately started engraving the core magic arrays of the 3 Flame Beast puppets. A few hours later, he completed the engravings and had Fang Shihan bring the 3 50-meter-tall combat puppets to East Lake City, one of the Fire Wing Empire's border cities. When the battle at East Lake City took place, the difference between the two sides was significant. Although the Fire Wing Empire had dispatched 2 Tier 5 NPCs and over 500 Tier 4 NPCs to defend the city, the Outer Worlds NPC army had dispatched an even stronger force of 4 Tier 5 NPCs, over 1,000 Tier 4 NPCs, and 6 million Tier 3 NPCs. The difference between the player armies of the two sides was also significant. Although the Secret Pavilion had dispatched many of its experts and gathered the help of many guilds, it only managed to form an army of around 400 Tier 4 players and 10 million Tier 3 players. In comparison, the Outer Worlds player army had over 800 Tier 4 players and 10 million Tier 3 players. The battle at East Lake City lasted more than a day. During this time, the 3 Flame Beast puppets played a vital role, pinning down 2 Tier 5 NPCs and 1 Tier 5 summoned creature. In the end, the Tier 5 summoned creature's control duration ran out, and the Outer Worlds NPCs and players had no choice but to retreat. Although the Secret Pavilion suffered a casualty ratio of 6-4, with 6 of the Secret Pavilion's members dying for every 4 of the Outer Worlds players, this result still shook the entire Eastern continent. This was because no empire had ever attained such a casualty ratio before this battle. Typically, the various empires had an 8-2 or even 9-1 casualty ratio. If all battles could end with a 6-4 casualty ratio, the Eastern continent's native forces would have a significant advantage in the long run, and the Outer World forces would eventually suffer defeat. This was because of the significant difference between the respawn points of the two sides. The Outer World players who died in battle could get resurrected only at the World Passage's entrance. This meant that they would have to travel a great distance to return to the battlefield. Native players, on the other hand, could get resurrected in the fortresses or city's resurrection temple and rejoin the battle immediately. After the battle at East Lake City, many of the Eastern continent's superpowers started sending requests for help to Zero Wing. Shi Feng was naturally more than happy to accept these requests. Zero Wing could earn a ton of wealth as well as the materials needed to manufacture the Blue Thunder flying ships and Flame Beast puppets, through these requests and even accumulate 7 Luminaries crystals. Subsequently, for the next month or so, Zero Wing's Flame Beast puppets visited one battlefield after another on the Eastern continent. Initially, there were only 3 Flame Beast puppets moving from one battlefield to another. Later on, there were a dozen Flame Beast puppets divided among 3 or 4 battlefields at a time. Eventually, there were 34 Flame Beast puppets fighting in more than 10 battlefields simultaneously. Because of these Flame Beast puppets, the Eastern continent's overall war situation experienced a significant improvement. In the meantime, Zero Wing had made a huge profit. And because of this massive wealth, not only did Zero Wing City, Ancient Rock City, Silverwing City, and Stone Forest City receive comprehensive improvements, but even the Lost Town had been upgraded to a basic city. Now, over 1 million Zero Wing members could be seen training in the Lost Town at all times. Moreover, during this past month, Zero Wing's Tier 3 member count had also breached 3 million. And thanks to the Lost Town's extraordinary tower and the environments of Zero Wing City and Ancient Rock City, the number of experts getting promoted to Tier 4 in Zero Wing also far exceeded that of all guilds in God's domain. Zero Wing now had over 200 Tier 4 players under its command. In addition, Fire Dance, Violet Cloud, and Yen Tianxing had succeeded in creating their Tier 5 mana bodies and gotten promoted to Tier 5, instantly increasing Zero Wing's overall combat power by a considerable margin. This development caused all of God's domain's guilds to grow envious. After all, during the same period, the 5 great super guilds had managed to produce only 1 Tier 5 player each in contrast to Zero Wing's 3. Moreover, this was after they had expended all their war contributions to exchange for resources that could aid in the Tier 5 promotion. Meanwhile, with Zero Wing's combat support, many player forces had managed to produce a significant number of Tier 4 players by utilizing the resources they acquired from their respective kingdoms and empires. This, in turn, gradually bridged the gap between God's domains and the Outer Worlds players and turned the tide of the War of Worlds in the Eastern continent's favor. On the other hand, Starlink, which had constantly been opposing Zero Wing, wasn't doing so well. Starlink had failed to defend many of the NPC cities it controlled in the Dark Knight Empire and lost most of its investments there. The situation in the other empires and kingdoms Starlink operated was similar, and Starlink fell to the bottom of the various superpowers. Now many of its members were even withdrawing from the guild. However, just when everyone thought the Second War of Worlds would stabilize again, like last time, an earth-shattering battle took place in Flamehorn City, one of the Fire Dragon Empire's top 8 cities. Working together, Flamehorn City's magistrate Krobidi, who was the Fire Dragon Empire's former deputy knight commander and a level 200 tier 5 dragon knight, and the War God's Temple's elder Lovefrid, who was a demigod-level existence and one of the 10 saints, fought a mysterious youth in Flamehorn City. However, after only 3 exchanges, the mysterious youth reduced both Krobidi and Lovefrid to ashes, and Flamehorn City disappeared from the Fire Dragon Empire. 5 days later, the mysterious youth appeared in the Glory Empire's Light City, along with several of the Outer World's Tier 5 NPCs. Together, they stormed the palace in Light City and killed the Glory Empire's emperor and over a dozen other Tier 5 existences. Afterward, Light City also disappeared from the map of God's domain. The Glory Empire fell in the blink of an eye, which plunged the Eastern continent into unprecedented fear. During the First War of Worlds, only kingdoms had fallen to the outer world. In the eyes of players, empires were unshakable existences. This was because an empire's foundation wasn't something that Tier 5 existences could threaten. Even the appearance of multiple Tier 5 dragons would, at most, cause an empire severe losses. Not to mention the attacked city was the Glory Empire's capital. The ancient barrier protecting the city could allow an allied Tier 5 combatant to go up against several hostile Tier 5 combatants easily. Light City itself had also had over a dozen Tier 5 NPCs garrisoning it, with some of them even equipped with legendary weapons and equipment. It was no exaggeration to say that Light City could put up a fight against even Tier 6 gods. Yet the invincible Glory Empire had still fallen. Moreover, the souls of a considerable portion of the players killed in Light City had sustained heavy damage, which prohibited those players from logging into the game for 1 whole month. Some even had to restart with a new account. Ancient Rock City, City Lord's Mansion, Core Control Room. Currently, Shifeng sat alone inside the quiet and spacious hall. With Golden Soul activated, he tried using his mind to completely stop the operation of all mana within his vicinity. Over the past month, Shifeng had not only reached level 192 but also learned how to forcibly stop the operation of mana. Even without the help of Golden Soul, he could now incorporate the law of destruction into his sword techniques. The only problem was that doing so placed a much heavier burden on his concentration. It seems I need to push my concentration to tier 6 no matter what. Otherwise, I can't truly control the law of destruction. When the effects of Golden Soul disappeared, Shifeng smiled bitterly as he looked at the shattered space around him. At this point, he was already flummoxed by the difficulty of raising his concentration to the tier 6 standard. He had originally thought that he could continuously develop his concentration with the help of soul water and crystals of souls. Even if the process took a lot of time, it wouldn't matter. Unfortunately, he discovered that he was mistaken. Roughly 2 weeks ago, he had sensed that his concentration had reached the limits of tier 5. No matter how much soul water and crystals of souls he consumed after that, his concentration did not improve in the slightest. In contrast, after consuming the meditation potions in the real world, he had broken through to the 3-star mental strength master standard 2 days ago. His improvement in the real world was many times faster than in God's domain. Just when Shifeng was racking his mind on how to improve his concentration, Feng Shihan suddenly entered the hall. Approaching Shifeng with a magic crystal recorder, Feng Shihan said with a grim expression, "Guild leader, I've uncovered the purpose of that mysterious youth's actions." "What's his aim?" Shifeng asked with concern. When the mysterious youth appeared in Flamehorn City, Shifeng had already guessed the other party's identity. The mysterious youth was none other than the scholar. However, compared to their meeting in the evil god's secret land, the scholar who had appeared in Flamehorn City had undergone significant changes. During their last meeting, the scholar didn't have any divine markings on his face. In Flamehorn City, the scholar had dark purple divine markings on his forehead and cheeks. Moreover, he also gave off a sacred feeling. His aim should be the 7 treasures. According to the information and video recordings taken, he demanded the 7 treasures from the NPCs he fought, Feng Shihan said as she passed the magic crystal recorder to Shifeng. When Shifeng activated the crystal, what appeared before him was a video recording of the battle in Light City. This video was taken by a Tier 4 assassin who had been spectating the battle from far away using a magic mirror. In the video, the Glory Empire's emperor could be seen taking out a silver emblem. Several barriers then appeared in front of the emperor, which blocked all of the scholar's attacks. After seeing his attacks blocked, the scholar said, as expected of the treasure of space, "Hand over the spatial emblem and I will spare your life." However, the emperor did not agree to the scholar's demand, and he fought the scholar to a standstill, relying on his superb spatial manipulation techniques. Eventually, though, the scholar took out his staff and the battle was quickly decided. Meanwhile, after seeing that the situation was amiss, the Tier 4 assassin who was recording the battle promptly fled Light City. "He's looking for the 7 treasures?" Shi Feng frowned. Shi Feng had constantly been searching for the 7 treasures. However, even now he had managed to acquire only 4 of them: the treasure of illusion, treasure of time, treasure of fire, and treasure of wind. The treasure of wind was something Fire Dance and the others had gone to great lengths to locate and obtain. As for the 3 remaining treasures he was missing, he never found any information on them. Shi Feng never thought that the scholar would also be looking for the 7 treasures. This was undoubtedly terrible news for him. Shi Feng suspected that the scholar was currently under some restrictions, which prevented the scholar from attacking him. However, there was no doubt that the scholar was slowly and steadily removing those restrictions. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared attack and kill Tier 5 NPCs. At this rate, it was only a matter of time before the scholar came for him. "Oh, by the way, guild leader, I found the 2 weapons you asked me to find," Fang Shihan said as she took out 2 long swords from her bag. With a pained expression, she continued, "The one named Broken Steel cost us 1 fragmented legendary weapon and 1 fragmented legendary armor to acquire." The 2 longswords she took out were both epic weapons that could be used up to level 180. Although they were excellent weapons for Tier 4 experts, they were hardly as valuable as fragmented legendary weapons. Yet Shi Feng was willing to exchange for them using fragmented legendary weapons. This was simply a huge loss. "Great. This is great." Shi Feng grew ecstatic as he looked at the 2 longswords. Of the 2 swords, the sky blue one was named Broken Steel while the black one was named Night Slayer. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Although Fang Shihan deemed Shi Feng's decision wasteful, he paid no heed to the cost at all. After all, even 10 fragmented legendary weapons weren't worth as much as 1 legendary weapon. Not to mention, Solomon's sword was one of God's domain's 10 great legendary weapons. Previously, after the scholar's sudden appearance in Flamehorn City, Shi Feng had been thinking of completing Solomon's sword to elevate his strength further. Otherwise, with the light of 2 worlds alone, he would have difficulty keeping himself alive in front of the scholar. The instant Shi Feng accepted the 2 longswords from Fang Shihan, a system notification entered his ears. "System. All the fragments of Solomon's sword detected. Do you wish to recast Solomon's sword? Recast it." Chapter 29:16. Solomon's Sword. When Shi Feng chose to recast Solomon's sword, the 5 fragments of Solomon's sword appeared in front of him one after another. Killing Ray, Disaster Blade, Netherworld Brilliance, Night Slayer, and Broken Steel. The 5 long swords resonated with one another and released a dazzling brilliance. A few seconds later, the 5 long swords fused, transforming into a crimson long sword with black markings. Black electric arcs flickered around the blade of the weapon, their presence repeatedly shattering the surrounding space. The instant the crimson longsword took shape, Fang Shihan was stunned. A legendary weapon? At this point, Fang Shihan was already familiar with the aura of legendary weapons. After all, Zero Wing Het 5. Besides Shi Feng's Light of 2 Worlds, Gentle Snow, Aqua Rose, and Yen Tianxing each had a legendary weapon. Recently, Violet Cloud had also finally upgraded her Death Sai to the legendary rank. Every legendary weapon could grant its user the power to transcend tiers. With a legendary weapon, a Tier 5 player would instantly become an existence close to rivaling Tier 6 gods. Legendary weapons far exceeded fragmented legendary weapons in performance. After Solomon's sword took shape, Shi Feng excitedly grabbed it and checked its statistics. Solomon's sword. One-handed sword, legendary rank, equipment requirement. Strength 50,000, Tier 4 attack power 460% of strength. Attack speed 3% of agility plus vitality. All attributes increases according to the user's level. When equipped, Attacks ignore 100% defense. Attacks have a 15% chance to increase attack speed by 300%. Attacks have a 60% chance to deal 300% damage. Attacks have a 20% chance to deal 1000% damage. Attacks deal 200% damage to targets under Tier 6. Attacks carry the soul. Weakening effect. Strength increased by 300%. Agility increased by 180%. Intelligence increased by 150%. Endurance increased by 80%. Attack speed increased by 170%. Ignore levels plus 80. All sword type skills plus 2 level, up to Tier 6 peak. Power of all attacks increased by 2 ranks, up to Tier 6 peak. Effective mana increased by 200%. All concentration consumption reduced by 30%. Additional passive skill Eternal Soul. Improves the user's soul significantly and increases world perception by 1 level. Additional active skill 1 Destructive Thunderbolt. Tier 6 with the user as the center. Inflict devastating damage to all enemies within a 10,000-yard radius for up to 10 seconds. The longer the skill is kept active, the greater its power becomes, up to Tier 6 peak. Cooldown. 1 minute additional active skill 2 World Sword. Tier 6 create 99 formless swords using the power of the world. The created swords will carry power 2 ranks higher than the user. Duration. 30 seconds cooldown. 1 hour additional active skill 3 Final Sword. Tier 6 activate all of Solomon's sword's power using the power of the user's soul for 1 attack. The stronger the user's soul, the stronger the activated power will be up to Tier 6 peak rank. The resulting attack is capable of destroying the soul of all things. Cooldown. 10 minutes. Created by the ancient god of thunder. Solomon's sword possesses the power source of an ancient god, and it is capable of destroying all things. As expected of one of the 10 great legendary weapons. Its attributes are not the slightest bit inferior to the Light of Two Worlds'. Shi Feng was astonished when he read Solomon's sword statistics. The Light of Two Worlds was a weapon focused on improving its wielder's life rating, while Solomon's sword focused on improving its wielder's soul. The effects of the two weapons were of equal importance. When used together, they easily surpassed other legendary weapon pairings. Although Shi Feng still hadn't reached Tier 6, both his life rating and soul were now close to reaching the Tier 6 standard. If he were to fight Los Ferret, the commander of the Outer World's 19th Army Corps, he could probably gain the upper hand even without using Golden Soul. By the way, there's one more important matter I need to tell you, Guild Leader, Feng Shihan said. She then took out an invitation card made entirely of 7 luminaries crystal and handed it to Shi Feng. This is the invitation the 5 great super guilds sent to all first-rate guilds and above in God's domain. They are hosting a conference in Blackwing City tomorrow to discuss countermeasures for the Outer World forces and that mysterious youth. 7 luminaries crystal? What a generous move. Shi Feng was a little surprised when he looked at the invitation card in his hand. 7 luminaries crystal was a resource the various superpowers were desperately trying to acquire. Even though Zero Wing had done the same, the guild only had a stockpile of 160,000 units and dared not spend them recklessly. Yet the 5 great super guilds had used 7 luminaries crystals to create the invitation cards they sent to the various guilds. Moreover, this invitation card wasn't just a plain card. It had a special teleportation array engraved on it that allowed the card's owner to teleport to Blackwing City. Shi Feng estimated that one invitation card would cost at least 5 7 luminaries crystals to make. Meanwhile, there were easily over 1,000 first-rate guilds, super first-rate guilds, and super guilds in God's domain. In other words, the 5 great super guilds would have had to spend at least 5,007 luminaries crystals. The 7 luminaries crystal invitation card is the highest-ranking invitation. Below it are mana stone and magic crystal invitation cards, Feng Shihan explained. According to the different invitation cards, the number of companions one can bring along will differ as well. The magic crystal invitation only allows you to bring 1 companion, while the mana stone invitation allows for 2 companions, and the 7 luminaries crystal invitation allows for 4 companions. Even so, this is still plenty amazing. Creating these special teleportation items alone would cost a pretty penny after all, Shi Feng said. If it were up to him, he definitely wouldn't be willing to spend so much just to host a conference. Of course, the fact that the 5 great super guilds were willing to go so far also showed how much of a threat the mysterious youth was. Even in his previous life, he had never once seen such a grand conference in God's domain. Are we going? Fang Shihan couldn't help asking. In terms of overall combat power, Zero Wing was currently the undisputed #1 guild in God's domain. The guild also wouldn't have any problems defending the Twin Towers Kingdom and its several guild cities. Hence, it didn't really matter whether Zero Wing participated in this conference or not. Moreover, Zero Wing was enemies with 2 of the 5 great super guilds. Of course we're going. Shifeng said, smiling. Have Fire, Violet and Tianqing get ready. The 4 of you are coming with me. At this point he no longer cared about the Outer World's NPC army. However, it was a different story for the scholar. According to Zero Wing's investigations, the scholar had deep ties with the Outer World's NPCs. It was quite likely that Shifeng would have to face the Outer World's NPC army when he met with the scholar again. Hence, he had to get the help of God's domain's player forces. After all, the various kingdoms and empires had opened up their treasuries because of the War of Worlds. With the various promotion resources these treasuries offered, the players of God's domain would improve rapidly. At the current rate, Tier 5 players would probably start popping up in larger numbers in another 1 or 2 months. At that time, the various superpowers' advantages would start to reveal themselves, and they would become significantly more useful than they were now. Most importantly, Zero Wing could take advantage of this guild conference to solidify its position in God's domain. After all, Zero Wing currently had very little influence in the Western continent. Moreover, because the Western continent wasn't involved in the War of Worlds, the Western continent's exploration of dungeons and ruins was significantly faster than the Eastern continent's. I'll notify them right away. Fang Shihan nodded to Shifeng's command. Truthfully, she was very interested in this gathering. After all, once the conference ended, the experts of the various guilds would interact with each other. These interactions might not seem like much on the surface, but they would allow experts to learn about different combat techniques and expand their knowledge of mana. If she was lucky and received inspiration, she might be able to create her Tier 5 mana body. Currently, her mana body's completion rate had reached 120%, and she couldn't improve it no matter how much she tried. Rather than persisting in her current training, it would be much better to spar with other experts. Early the next morning, Shifeng teleported to Blackwing City together with Fang Shihan and the others. As for Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose, they were tasked with keeping guard over Zero Wing's guild cities and the Twin Towers Kingdom as a precaution. Blackwing City Teleportation Hall. Along with a flash of light, Shifeng's group of 5 arrived in the teleportation hall's central teleportation array. Blackwing City was much more crowded than normal. Apart from the experts of the invited guilds, experts from uninvited guilds and independent players were also in the city. The 5 great super guilds had invited all of God's domain's first-rate guilds and above to attend the conference this time. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that most of God's domain's top experts were gathered in Blackwing City today. This was a situation that normally couldn't be found in any city. Even if the uninvited guilds and independent players couldn't participate in the conference, they could still get a look at God's domain's strongest players. If they were fortunate, they might even get to see these top experts sparring with each other. Hence, when news of the 5 great super guilds holding a grand conference got out, countless guilds and players sought to enter Blackwing City. If not for Blackwing City requiring an entry pass, players would have long since flooded the city to the point of overflowing. Nonetheless, the number of players currently gathered in Blackwing City still exceeded 30 million. Moreover, most of the players roaming Blackwing City's streets were Tier 3. Tier 4 players were also present in large numbers. In the current Blackwing City, even Refinement Realm experts would have to act carefully and humbly. Otherwise, there was a high chance they would end up offending a Flowing Water Realm expert or even a Void Realm expert. When Shifeng arrived at the Blackwing Auction House, the designated conference venue, he found that over 1,000 Tier 4 experts belonging to the 5 great super guilds had established a perimeter. Even the weakest among these Tier 4 experts was at level 170 and geared in level 180 Dark Gold set equipment. Quite a number of these experts also had 4 to 5 pieces of level 180 epic equipment and weapons. As for the 5 players standing in the lead, not only were they over level 180, but even the weakest piece of equipment on them was level 180 epic equipment. All 5 of these players also boasted a fragmented legendary weapon paired with 2 or 3 pieces of fragmented legendary equipment. These players thoroughly displayed the 5 great super guilds' might. With all these Tier 4 players gathered in front of the Blackwing auction house, the terrifying aura they exuded deterred even ordinary Tier 4 players from approaching the building. This is crazy. So this is the 5 great super guilds' strength? Crap. Our guild barely has any level 180 epic equipment. Yet every one of the 5 great super guilds Tier 4 experts has at least one. I think that any one of those 5 people standing in the lead can easily beat up our entire guild. Who do you think you are? Your guild is only a third-rate guild. Those 5 people wouldn't have trouble wiping out even second-rate guilds. Do you know who those people are? They're the strongest talents belonging to the 5 great super guilds' younger generation. I heard that not only have all 5 of them reached the domain realm, but their mana bodies are even above the 110% completion rate. They are all bona fide monsters. It's a pity our guild isn't a first-rate guild. Otherwise we would get to participate in the conference too. The players crowding the street outside the Blackwing auction house spoke with awe as they looked at the 5 great super guilds members. At the same time, they also felt envious of the players participating in the conference this time. After all, if they could learn a thing or two from one of the 5 great super guilds Tier 4 experts, it would easily save them several months of training. Amid the crowd's hushed discussions, Tier 4 experts approached the Blackwing auction house and presented their invitation cards one after another. Then the 5 great super guilds experts ushered them into the auction house. At one point, when the leader of a 3-man group presented a 7 luminaries crystal invitation, a commotion immediately erupted among the bystanders. This was because the middle-aged man who was the leader of this 3-man group was actually a Tier 5 expert, one nobody had ever heard of before. What a bunch of ignorant fools. Do they think only superpowers can produce Tier 5 experts? One of the 3-man group's members, a female great wizard holding a crimson staff, scoffed as she looked at the surrounding crowd scornfully. Sooner or later, our name of Shadow Vengeance will echo throughout God's domain. She felt only contempt for the various superpowers experts. This was because the various superpowers experts had relied on an astronomical amount of resources to develop themselves. In comparison, she and the experts of her guild had achieved their current strength through one battle after another. I heard that the Eastern Continent's Zero Wing would be attending as well. Between guild leader and Black Flame, I wonder who is stronger. The 3rd member of the group, a brown-haired youth, said excitedly. Of course our guild leader is stronger. That Black Flame is only famous because he's the first person to reach Tier 5, the female great wizard sneered. She had great confidence in Iron Soul, their guild leader. This was because Iron Soul could receive a Tier 5 legendary monster's attack and survive while at Tier 4. Now that Iron Soul had reached Tier 5, his strength was immeasurable. Iron Soul, the middle-aged man, did not refute his companion's words either. One of his goals in participating in the conference this time was to spar with God's Domain's other Tier 5 players and use this opportunity to bring Shadow Vengeance's name to fame. However, shortly after the Great Wizard finished speaking, crisp and sweet laughter entered the ears of their group of 3. What a bold claim. I wonder if your guild leader really is as strong as you say he is? As soon as these words fell, the trio from Shadow Vengeance turned toward the source of the voice and found themselves looking at a group of 5. The one who spoke was a tall woman with an alluring body clad in dark red leather. Zero Wings Fire Dance. 4 Tier 5s. Currently, Shifeng's group of 5 did not bother concealing their identities or statistics. Hence, the surrounding crowd gasped when they saw their tiers. Tier 5 players were basically mythical existences in the current God's Domain. Most superpowers didn't even have one Tier 5 player under their command. Yet Zero Wing had gained 3 more Tier 5 players aside from Black Flame, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose. At this time the trio from Shadow Vengeance felt pressured. They never thought that Zero Wing was this strong. If it were a one-on-one, Iron Soul was confident he could still put up a fight. However, he would only be seeking his own death if he tried to fight 4 Tier 5 experts. After all, anyone capable of reaching Tier 5 definitely wasn't a weakling. If Tier 5 experts worked together, it wouldn't merely be a simple addition of combat power. Instead, their combat power would rise exponentially. Just when the female Great Wizard from Shadow Vengeance was about to say something, Fire Dance suddenly disappeared from everyone's sight. Before Iron Soul and his companions could react, Fire Dance was already standing in front of the three of them. Her movements were even more astonishing than someone using instantaneous movement. Someone using instantaneous movement would at least generate spatial fluctuations that others could detect. However, Fire Dance's movements generated neither sound nor fluctuation. Her presence had even disappeared completely when she moved. By the time Iron Soul's group detected her presence again, she had already crossed the 100-yard distance between them, as if she had been standing in front of them all along. "If you want to fight our guild leader, you'll have to go through me first," Fire Dance said, smiling as she looked at Iron Soul's group. She then disappeared and reappeared by Shifeng's side. Only after Shifeng's group of 5 had entered the Blackwing auction house did the Tier 4 players outside the auction house snap out of their daze. What amazing footwork! Iron Soul had a grim expression as he looked at Fire Dance's departing figure. "Guild leader, did you manage to see what she did?" the female Great Wizard couldn't help asking. Tier 5 players possessed far superior life ratings than Tier 4 players. There was even a massive gap in basic attributes. Hence, it was incredibly difficult for a Tier 4 player like herself to perceive the movements of a Tier 5 player. However, it should be a different story for Iron Soul. He could speed up his thoughts twofold with his Tier 5 concentration, so he should be able to perceive Fire Dance's movements. "I didn't," Iron Soul said, shaking his head. In a quiet tone, he added, "Rather than saying that she's fast, it'd be more appropriate to say that she exists everywhere within her mana domain. The mastery she has over her mana domain far exceeds mine." "Is she that strong?" The female Great Wizard was astonished. Since someone as strong as Iron Soul had said so, even if she didn't want to, she had no choice but to acknowledge that Fire Dance was probably stronger than Iron Soul. After recollecting himself, Iron Soul looked at his two companions and said, "There are countless experts in God's domain, and anyone capable of reaching Tier 5 is extraordinary. You should be more careful with your words. The fact that Black Flame has garnered such a reputation for himself proves that he isn't weak." At this point, Iron Soul no longer had any plans to ask Shifeng for a spar. After all, his chances of defeating even Fire Dance were slim already. What qualifications did he have to challenge God's domain's strongest player? Besides Shadow Vengeance, the other player forces originating from the Western continent promptly stopped underestimating Zero Wing. This was especially true for the superpowers that had managed to produce Tier 5 players. Time passed quickly, the number of guilds gathered in the Blackwing auction house continuously increasing. Several hours later, all of the invited guilds had finally arrived. Over 1,000 guilds were attending the conference, bringing more than 2,000 Tier 4 players and 23 Tier 5 players in all. The number of Tier 5 players attending the conference far exceeded everyone's expectations. Of the 23 Tier 5 players in attendance, 10 belonged to the 5 great super guilds. Apart from the original 5 Tier 5 players, the 5 great super guilds had each produced one more Tier 5 player during this period. The Secret Pavilion, Battle Wolves, Flower of Seven Sins, Violet Sword, Sacred Temple, and Divine Tribe had each produced one Tier 5 player as well. And in addition to Shadow Vengeance, 2 other first-rate guilds had also produced one Tier 5 player each. Even Shifeng did not expect such a development. With this revelation, the hierarchy of God's domain's player forces was bound to change drastically. However, compared to the change in God's domain's power hierarchy, the information the 5 great super guilds and Secret Pavilion shared was even more astonishing. According to their investigations, the mysterious youth had actually unified the Outer World's NPC army. Currently, all of the Outer World's NPCs scattered across the eastern continent were quietly making their way to the Fire Dragon Empire. This revelation put a grim expression on everyone's face. Needless to say, the mysterious youth intended to strike at the Fire Dragon Empire, one of God's domain's 4 great empires, by gathering such a large force. Although they didn't know the mysterious youth's aim, if the Fire Dragon Empire disappeared, the eastern continent would probably be doomed as well. That basically sums up the situation. After the Secret Pavilion's Yuan Tiexin shared all of the investigation results with everyone in the hall, he said, "Currently the eastern continent's various kingdoms and empires have started sending troops to the Fire Dragon Empire already. They are also doing their best to hinder the Outer World NPC army's movements. However, we estimate that the Outer World NPC army will finish gathering in at most another month. Once the Outer World NPCs have gathered, they will launch an all-out attack on the Fire Dragon Empire. To weaken the Outer World NPCs, we need to conduct guerrilla warfare together with the various kingdoms and empires and try to reduce the Outer World NPC army's strength as much as possible. However, just as Yuan Tiexian was about to go into detail about the secret pavilion and the 5 great super guilds' plan to weaken the Outer World's NPC army, a commotion suddenly erupted outside the Blackwing auction house. The next moment, the space within the stadium-sized conference venue shattered, and 2 8-winged women walked out of the shattered space. The aura that the 2 alluring women radiated immobilized all of the Tier 4 players present. Only the Tier 5 players could barely move. Fallen archangels? Why would they appear here? Everyone doubted their eyes when they saw the 2 alluring women. Fallen angels were existences close to rivaling dragons, while fallen archangels rivaled divine dragons. Meanwhile, the 2 women before them were both bona fide level 200 Tier 5 fallen archangels. In an era where Tier 6 gods had disappeared from the mortal world, Tier 5 fallen archangels were no different from gods. Heaven-blessed individuals, hand over the 7 treasures. After declaring the reason for their presence, one of the fallen archangels turned to Shifeng, while the other faced a Tier 5 middle-aged man, Iron Soul. They're going straight for the 7 treasures? Shifeng's expression turned solemn as he looked at the 2 fallen archangels. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Shifeng already had a huge headache dealing with the scholar. However, he never thought that the scholar could get 2 fallen archangels to do his bidding. This situation was simply inconceivable. Others might not know the true extent of a Tier 5 fallen archangel's strength, but he did. In the past, he had watched a Tier 6 god-ranked expert clash with a Tier 5 fallen archangel. That person was none other than Endless Scars, the #1 expert on God's Domain's experts list at the time. Back then, despite wielding a legendary weapon, Endless Scars had struggled to kill a level 220 Tier 5 fallen archangel. If an ordinary Tier 6 god-ranked expert encountered a Tier 5 fallen archangel, their only option was to run away. After all, a Tier 5 fallen archangel could slay a Tier 6 god-ranked expert by relying on their immensely high HP. Now, 2 fallen archangels had appeared in the Blackwing auction house. Chapter 29:17, Ancient Gods Awakening. When the 2 fallen archangels saw that neither Shifeng nor Iron Soul showed any intention of handing over the 7 treasures, they both immediately summoned a spear of crimson lightning. Die! The 2 fallen archangels threw their spears at Shifeng and Iron Soul simultaneously. Tier 5 taboo skill, Thundering Devastator. The lightning spears were incredibly fast, leaving red trails as they shot toward their respective targets. The Tier 4 players in the spear's paths died instantly, their bodies evaporating without a trace. The Tier 4 players killed didn't even realize that they had died. They only saw a red light enter their vision before they found themselves forcibly logged out of the game. Of those present in the hall, only the Tier 5 players managed to react to the fallen archangel's lightning spears. Iron Soul immediately grabbed his shield and entered a defensive stance when he saw one of the lightning spears coming for him. Simultaneously, spatial barriers formed in front of him one after another, 30 of them tightly packed in front of Iron Soul's dark mist shield. This was Iron Soul's trademark move. Mana technique Boundless Barrier. Boundless Barrier was also why he managed to block an attack from a Tier 5 legendary monster when he was still at Tier 4. Now that he was at Tier 5, the technique's defensive power had also undergone a qualitative transformation. Boom. The next moment, the lightning spear thrown at Iron Soul pierced through the spatial barriers one after another. However, with each layer the spear penetrated, the spear's power also weakened. When the spear broke through all 30 layers and landed on Iron Soul's dark mist shield, the shield acted like a black hole that absorbed all of the spear's remaining power. Iron Soul stumbled half a step backward and lost around 10 million HP. For Iron Soul, a level 186 Tier 5 Guardian Knight losing 10 million HP was nothing. Not to mention, unlike the average Tier 5 Guardian Knight who had around 200 million HP, Iron Soul's maximum HP was 300 million. This was because, in addition to coming across many fortuitous opportunities, he also boasted a legendary shield. Iron Soul might not rank at the top among Tier 5 players in attack power, but he definitely ranked first in defense. This was also what gave Iron Soul the confidence to challenge the various superpowers Tier 5 experts. However, before any of the players could voice their awe of Iron Soul's amazing defense, the lightning spear thrown at Shifeng crashed into an invisible wall and deflected toward the hall's ceiling. The spear then pierced through the ceiling's defensive magic array and opened a hole in the ceiling, revealing the sky outside. Everyone was thunderstruck. What did he do? That's a Tier 5 taboo skill we're talking about. Many of the Tier 4 experts and even the 5 Great Super Guild's Tier 5 experts hadn't caught how Shifeng had actually deflected a Tier 5 taboo skill just now. Moreover, Shifeng did not receive even a point of damage in the process. He was evidently much stronger than Iron Soul. However, Shifeng did not relax after turning the fallen archangel's attack. Instead he shouted, "Everyone exit the hall immediately. This is Blackwing City. So long as the NPCs arrive, these two fallen archangels should leave." Everyone hurriedly moved their feet when they heard Shifeng's words, none of them daring to linger for even a moment longer. Although Shifeng and Iron Soul had effortlessly stopped the two fallen archangels' attacks, everyone could tell that the fallen archangels had merely launched a casual attack just now. Apart from the Tier 5 players present, anyone that accidentally got caught in one of the fallen archangels' attacks would probably vaporize. After all, these two fallen archangels were existences capable of rivaling Tier 6 gods. Even ordinary Tier 5 players were nothing in front of them. The Tier 4 experts in the hall promptly evacuated. As for the Tier 5 experts, they surrounded the two fallen archangels. I never thought my first battle after being promoted to Tier 5 would be against such monsters. What's even more surprising is that I'll be fighting alongside you old monsters. Mythology's Odin, who was wearing a white cloak and had completely concealed his face, said as he looked at the several Tier 5 experts around him. "You can fight them by yourself if you don't want to work together. I won't stop you," an old man in dark gray armor from Netherworld Empire said as he glanced at Odin. As for the elderly men from the 3 other super guilds, they remained silent as they looked at Odin and the old man in dark gray armor, knowing that these two old men were longtime rivals. If the conference this time did not concern God's domain's continued existence, neither of them would have been willing to stay in the same room as the other. Meanwhile, the two fallen archangels before them were existences that even beyond domain realm experts like themselves had to be wary of. Ziliaware. Fallen Archangel Legendary. Level 200 HP 900 billion Garudika. Fallen Archangel Legendary. Level 200 HP 900 billion. Even if all 23 Tier 5 experts worked together, they wouldn't be able to kill even one of these fallen archangels, let alone two. Lowly ants, learn the consequences of going against the master, the fallen archangel Ziliaware said as she looked with disdain at the Tier 5 players surrounding her. She then began chanting an incantation. The magic arrays of 3 Tier 5 curses started forming around Ziliaware, drawing all of the mana in the hall. Compared to the taboo skill she used before, these 3 curses were significantly stronger. However, the players present were all Tier 5 experts. They had no intention of letting Ziliaware complete her incantation. When Ziliaware began chanting, Odin had already appeared behind her and silently stabbed his translucent spatial sword into the fallen archangel's back. -41,564,786. Damage exceeding 40 million appeared above Ziliaware's head. However, Odin showed no excitement whatsoever when he saw this damage. On the contrary, a frown even formed on his face. What high defense! The dark gray armored old man holding a greatsword exclaimed as he looked at Ziliaware. Odin's attack power ranked 3rd in their group of 5 old men. Meanwhile, the attack he just used against Ziliaware was also his strongest move, a combination of a Tier 5 skill with the silver combat technique Blade's Heart. If a Tier 5 player got hit by this move directly, they would die on the spot. Yet Odin's attack only cost the fallen archangel 40 million HP. It didn't even affect Ziliaware's chanting in the slightest. After nonchalantly completing the incantations for her curses, Ziliaware said, "Ants. Your struggles are futile." The 3 Tier 5 curses magic arrays fully took form, and thousands of pitch-black feathers manifested inside the hall. These feathers then transformed into crows made of crimson lightning that flew toward Odin and the others. Triple spell combination. The 5 great super guilds' old monsters were momentarily stunned by this situation. In God's domain, Merging spells was much more difficult than merging skills. However, so long as one succeeded, the result would be much stronger than the fusion of two skills. Since Zhou had merged 3 spells into one, the power of the resulting attack would definitely be unprecedented in God's domain. Immediately, the 5 old monsters used their respective life-saving skills while doing their best to evade the lightning crows. They were no match for the fallen angel Zhou at all. Upon seeing this, Iron Soul, who was going up against the fallen angel Garudica, wore a grim expression on his face. He could sense that every one of these lightning crows carried power at the Tier 6 basic standard. Although they weren't as powerful as the earlier lightning spear, their large numbers made it impossible to completely block and dodge them all. Of the players present, only Shifeng did not find this situation surprising. A level 200 Tier 5 fallen archangel was basically a Tier 6 god. Meanwhile, killing a group of Tier 5 players was practically child's play for a Tier 6 god. Normally, players needed to reach Tier 6 to stand a chance against a Tier 5 fallen archangel. However, all of the Tier 5 players present had only recently gotten promoted to Tier 5. Their mastery of mana and equipment standards were nowhere near the passing mark for a Tier 5 player. Although they had astonishingly high combat standards, they couldn't bridge the gigantic gap in basic attributes. Meanwhile, after Zhou had thoroughly suppressed the 5 great super guild's old monsters, Garudica also took action. Similar to Zhou, Garudica used a triple spell combination. However, rather than creating thousands of lightning crows, she created hundreds of lightning swords instead. Although these lightning swords weren't as flexible as the lightning crows, they were much faster than the lightning crows. Every lightning sword also carried power at the Tier 6 intermediate standard, and any Tier 5 player that got struck by them would die without question. For a time, more than 500 lightning swords rampantly attacked Shifeng, Fire Dance, Violet Cloud, and Yen Tianxing. There were also over 100 lightning swords attacking Iron Soul. This situation forced Shifeng's group and Iron Soul to defend themselves frantically. Shifeng fared relatively well against the lightning swords. Solomon's sword had improved both his soul and world perception, which allowed him to perceive the lightning sword's movements with excellent clarity. In addition, as the power of these swords was only at the Tier 6 intermediate standard, he was more than capable of blocking them with his swords. As for Fire Dance, Violet Cloud, and Yen Tianxing, the 3 worked together to make up for their respective shortcomings. They also had Violet Cloud to provide constant healing and defensive buffs and Shifeng to cover any blunders. Hence, no matter how well Garudica coordinated her lightning swords, she didn't pose a real threat to Zero Wing's group of 4. Iron Soul, on the other hand, continuously lost HP throughout the battle. Even with Violet Cloud healing him occasionally, his HP still fell steadily. "Guild leader, we can't continue like this," Violet Cloud said as she started having difficulty keeping up with the healing. "These lightning swords are weakening the effects of my healing spells. At this rate, he'll get killed in another 10 seconds. Garudica's rampant attacks prevented Iron Soul from approaching their group and vice versa. However, if Iron Soul continued fending off those lightning swords on his own, he was sure to die. "I'll pin her down, so find an opportunity to group up." When Shifeng saw that Iron Soul had less than half of his HP remaining, he decided to stop holding back and activated World Sword. Immediately, 99 formless swords appeared around Shifeng, each one carrying power at the Tier 6 peak standard. Shifeng then sent these formless swords at Garudica. Swords orbit. When Garudica sensed the formless swords approaching her, she promptly recalled all her lightning swords to defend herself. How is he so strong? Iron Soul was stunned when he saw Garudica actively defending herself and at a disadvantage. From what Iron Soul could see, Shifeng was no match for the fallen archangel when it came to manipulating a large number of swords. With his 99 formless swords, Shifeng exhibited combat standards at only the refinement realm. In comparison, the fallen angel Garudica exhibited combat standards at the flowing water realm with her several hundred lightning swords. However, because Shifeng's formless swords carried much greater power, they could overcome the hundreds of lightning swords. While such a victory might seem crude, it was still incredibly astonishing. After all, the other Tier 5 players in the room were basically running for their lives when faced with the 2 fallen archangels' attacks. Yet Shifeng was fighting toe-to-toe with a fallen archangel. With Shifeng holding off Garudica, Iron Soul was finally able to join Violet Cloud's group of 3. The four of them then supported Shifeng from the side, and Garudika's HP bar actually decreased slightly. Although Garudika's battle recovery could easily restore all of the HP she lost, this situation still astonished the 5 great super guild's old monsters. After the battle continued for another 10 seconds, the first casualties finally appeared as Zilliware killed 2 Tier 5 experts. This situation infuriated the other Tier 5 experts present, but there was nothing they could do about it. After 26 seconds had passed since Shifeng activated World Sword, the space within the hall suddenly shattered once more. A woman wielding a 7-colored staff and wearing a sacred white robe and a golden crown then walked out of this shattered space. The Tier 5 players present froze for a second as an indescribably holy aura enveloped the room upon this woman's appearance, the aura instilling a sense of fear in their hearts. As for the 2 fallen archangels, they similarly stopped their attacks and stared at the approaching woman with eyes brimming with fear. This holy woman was none other than Charlene, who had been resting in Blackwing City. However, compared to the last time Shifeng had met with Charlene, this woman felt like a completely different person. Currently, Charlene looked and felt no different from a god, and every one of her actions was intertwined with the world itself. Her mere presence inspired feelings of reverence toward her. Damn it! Those good-for-nothings actually let this goddess escape. Zilliware cursed out loud when she saw the 24 or so dead or heavily injured Tier 5 Outerworld NPCs in the shattered space behind Charlene. The scholar must have lost his mind, seeing as he summoned you creatures, Charlene said as she looked at Zilliware and Garudika. After glancing at Shifeng's group, she continued, but since you've come here already, stay here forever. You think you can keep us here? After observing Charlene in greater detail, Zilliware laughed and said, you've just awakened. Do you think we're no match for you? However, as soon as Zilliware finished speaking, Charlene waved her 7-colored staff. Suddenly, all of the Tier 5 players present, including Shifeng, felt time slowing down. Even though their brains were still capable of thought, they couldn't move their bodies at all. He stopped time? Shifeng was astonished when he saw the gray world around him. Charlene's magic was simply heaven-defying. However, no more than 1 second after Charlene stopped time, the 2 fallen archangels actually broke free from the restraints of time, regaining their movement. They then charged at Charlene with spears of lightning in their hands. However, their movements now were much slower than before, so slow that even Tier 1 players could keep up with their movements. Meanwhile, Charlene simply raised a hand and shattered the surrounding space into countless fragments. She then turned these spatial fragments into blades and launched them at the 2 fallen archangels. The 2 fallen archangels brandished their spears to defend themselves, but they couldn't stop all of the spatial blades. The next moment, damage values exceeding 200 million appeared above the 2 fallen archangels' heads one after another. After one round of attacks, the 2 fallen archangels had lost over 5 billion HP each. However, compared to their maximum HP of 900 billion, a loss of 5 billion was nothing but a scratch. After the battle continued for another 20 seconds, the 2 fallen archangels' HP had fallen to the 80% threshold, proving that Charlene had the ability to kill them. Damn it! She has actually awakened to such an extent already. Zilliware glared at Charlene in vexation. We'll die here if we keep fighting, Garudika said with a grim expression. We need to retreat. If we wait until Blackwing City's ruler returns, we won't even have a chance to flee. We have no other choice but to use that move, Zilliware said, gritting her teeth as she took out a black rock. The moment Zilliware took out this black rock, a hint of wariness appeared on Charlene's face. When the Tier 5 players present saw Charlene's reaction, they were puzzled as they couldn't sense any aura or power from the black rock. In their eyes, the black rock was just an ordinary rock. However, before anyone could react, the black rock in Zilliware's hand disintegrated into dust. A strand of incomprehensibly strong power then formed on her palm and shattered the restraints of time on her, allowing her to recover her full mobility. World Blade. After regaining her mobility, Zilliware gripped the strand of power in her hand and swung it at Shifeng, Iron Soul and Charlene. The frozen time in the hall immediately started flowing again, and 3 streaks of black light that cut through the world itself flew toward Shifeng, Iron Soul and Charlene. Shifeng and Iron Soul were surprised by this development. They never thought that Zilliware would persist in attacking them, even in this situation. When Shifeng saw the approaching black light, he felt his soul shuddering like never before. He promptly activated Void Shield, World Breaker and Final Sword simultaneously, then executed Sword's transmigration without hesitation. As for Iron Soul, he similarly activated his strongest trump card, his legendary shield transforming into a dark mist that enveloped him. Boom! Along with a powerful explosion, the figure of a person shot out of the dust cloud like a cannonball and struck one of the conference hall's iron walls, shattering the magic arrays strengthening the wall. Guild leader Fire Dance was startled when she recognized the person planted in the wall. Shifeng could cut apart even the world itself when using World Breaker. Yet even after he had combined World Breaker with Final Sword and Sword's transmigration, he still suffered a severe blow, losing over 2/3 of his HP. This outcome was simply unbelievable. Meanwhile, when the dust settled, Iron Soul appeared standing in his original position. However, his body had been cleanly bisected and nothing remained of his HP bar. Along with Iron Soul's death, a bronze ring had also appeared by his corpse. Upon seeing this bronze ring, Zilliware promptly grabbed it. In the meantime, Garudika took advantage of the opportunity and thrust her spear at Shifeng. Facing Garudika's thrust, Shifeng felt powerless. After defending himself against Zilliware's World Blade, not only did he enter a heavily injured state, but both his arms had also gone numb. He wouldn't be able to move them anytime soon. However, just when Garudika was about to hit Shifeng, Charlene suddenly appeared in front of him and stopped Garudika's lightning spear with the tip of her finger. Boom! The next moment, the lightning spear suddenly dissipated harmlessly. An invisible force then sent Garudika flying backward and smashing into the wall on the other side of the room, her HP falling by over 100 million. Not good. Run! Zilliware shouted. She then tore space and disappeared into the opening together with the bronze ring she snagged. Garudika also tried to flee when she saw Zilliware retreating. However, before Garudika could even turn, Charlene was already in front of the fallen archangel, tapping her staff on the other party's forehead. Garudika found herself immobilized, her HP plummeting. After this situation continued for 30 seconds, Garudika's body transformed into a muddy crystal the size of a fist. Simultaneously, the intensity of Charlene's aura dropped off. After storing the muddy crystal, Charlene turned to Shifeng, who had just gotten back on his feet after much difficulty, and said, "You come with me. Everyone else, hurry back and get ready. You don't have much time left." After Charlene finished speaking, she waved her staff and summoned a teleportation gate. She then entered the gate, leaving behind Shifeng and the other Tier 5 players who were still in a daze. After scanning the surviving players, Shifeng had Fire Dance and the others returned to Zero Wing first. He then contacted Melancholic Smile and had her use all the available manpower to produce the Blue Thunder flying ship and the mobile fortress. These mobile weapons of mass destruction would play a crucial role in hindering the Outer World NPC army's advance. Afterward, Shifeng stepped into the teleportation gate Charlene summoned. The remaining players in the conference hall also understood what Charlene's words meant. Now that the mysterious youth had acquired another of the 7 treasures, his strength would most likely soar. If that happened, they would definitely have a much more difficult time fighting the Outer World's NPC army. Hence, they needed to return and immediately initiate countermeasures. They would also need to accelerate their plan to hinder the Outer World NPC army's advance. For a time, all of the Eastern Continent's player forces seethed with activity. Even the Western Continent's player forces began sending reinforcements en masse to the Eastern Continent. This was because everyone understood that the Fire Dragon Empire's fall basically meant game over for the entire God's domain. Hence, they needed to defend the Empire at all costs. On the other side, after Shifeng took the teleportation gate, he found himself in the top-floor hall of the Stargazing Tower. Charlene was sitting on the throne at the end of the hall, her complexion a little pale. She looked much weaker than when she killed the fallen Archangel Garudika. The scholar has lost his mind. Now that he has obtained another of the 7 treasures, he will eventually recover a significant portion of his power, Charlene said, getting straight to the point when she saw Shifeng. You currently have 4 of the 7 treasures on you. He will definitely target you next. If he acquires all of the 7 treasures, he will be able to recover fully and regain control over the entire God's domain. At that time, none of you heaven-blessed individuals will escape his wrath. You'll even be banished from this world of God's domain. Regain control over God's domain? Feng was confused by Charlin's words. The ancient gods used to rule over God's domain but ultimately lost control over it in the final struggle. The scholar is one of those ancient gods, Charlin said, nodding. Currently, most of his power is sealed in the 7 treasures. Or to be precise, the 7 treasures were created using his power. Right now, only a Tier 6 heaven-blessed individual can prevent him from making a full recovery. And as you are only one step away from getting promoted to Tier 6, I hope you can accomplish this quest. As soon as Charlin finished speaking, the sound of a system notification entered Feng's ears. System, congratulations. You have triggered the mythical quest Ancient God's Awakening. Quest content. Prevent the awakening of the ancient god. Quest reward unknown. There will be no penalty for failing the quest. Do you wish to accept this quest? Feng was nonplussed when he read the quest content. Did he even have a choice? Charlin had already stated very clearly that all players would be finished if he failed the quest. In that case, there naturally wouldn't be a need to impose any penalties. I accept this quest, Feng said as he looked at Charlin. After further thought he added, however, my concentration is currently stuck at the Tier 5 peak standard. Without it reaching Tier 6 I can't get promoted to Tier 6, much less stop that ancient god. Charlin smiled at Feng's attempt to bargain with her. She then said, just say it if you want benefits. I'm not a stingy person. Since you've already agreed to take on this quest, I'll naturally provide you with a certain degree of support. Currently, your concentration is indeed incapable of reaching Tier 6, and the reason for that is simple. You still lack accumulations. The gap between Tier 5 and Tier 6 is much greater than you think. At your current improvement speed, you'll probably need 1.5 years to elevate your concentration to Tier 6. A year and a half? Do I have that much time? Feng asked, frowning. Now, let alone 1.5 years, it would be a miracle if he had even 2 or 3 months to reach Tier 6. After all, the person targeting him was an ancient god. Of course not. However, the scholar has acquired the 3 treasures only recently. He also fears you somewhat. Until he recovers to a certain extent, he won't attack you anymore. If you're afraid for your safety, you can remain in Blackwing City. He won't dare barge into this place in his current state. However, the Fire Dragon Empire will probably be in trouble. There's a person sealed in the Fire Dragon Empire, and if this person is released, all of you will similarly be doomed, Charlin said, chuckling. As to how you can improve your concentration quickly, don't you have the Treasure of Illusion? You can use it to forcefully raise your concentration. After saying so, Charlin took out a muddy crystal, which was the crystallized form of the fallen archangel Garudika. This is that fallen archangel's soul. You should be able to produce a crystal of souls of incredible purity with it and break through to Tier 6 with her accumulations, Charlin said as she tossed the muddy crystal to Feng. Start your attempt now. You don't have much time left. When Feng accepted the muddy crystal, he could sense incredible soul power in it. Only this soul power was too chaotic. Even a small portion of it could cause a Tier 5 player to lose their mind. Afterward, Charlin disappeared, leaving Feng alone in the hall. Feng did not hesitate for long. He took out the soul orb and began refining the fallen archangel Garudika's soul. The outcome turned out as Charlin said. When the soul orb finished refining Garudika's soul, it produced a 7-colored crystal of souls containing soul power of incredible purity. Everything is up to you now. After Feng took a long look at the 7-colored crystal of souls, he swallowed it without hesitation. Suddenly, an indescribable comfort enveloped his body as boundless energy flooded his mind, continuously expanding his sea of consciousness. 1 hour. 3 hours. 1 day. After 2 whole days, Feng opened his eyes and found that the world around him had changed. Compared to before, the various elements of mana in the natural environment looked much more orderly. Before, he had felt as if he were looking at a pile of rubbish when he tried perceiving the mana around him. Everything was a mess and sorting through them required a lot of effort. Now, the various elements of mana were like items neatly displayed on a shelf. He could easily locate and reach out to any element he wanted, which made it much easier to control mana. Amazing. This is simply amazing. Just one of these 7-colored crystals of souls increased my concentration to the Tier 6 intermediate standard. Feng was filled with ineffable excitement. He had thought he would be fortunate if the 7-colored crystal could raise his concentration to the Tier 6 basic standard. He would have been satisfied with such a result, as it would qualify him to challenge his Tier 6 promotion. Although his chances of creating a superior divine body with Tier 6 basic concentration would be less than 20%, it was still better than nothing. However, now that his concentration had reached the Tier 6 intermediate standard, his control and perception of mana were much stronger than if he only had Tier 6 basic concentration. Now his chances of successfully creating a superior divine body should be around 30%. Following this, Shi Feng had Zero Wing frantically collecting 7 luminaries crystals for the subsequent month. He even traded some of the Flame Beast puppets for 7 luminaries crystals, with one Flame Beast puppet going for 4,007 luminaries crystals, 200 magic elven cores, and all the materials needed to manufacture one Flame Beast puppet. Initially, Shi Feng had not intended to sell the Flame Beast puppets. This was because Fire Dance and the others already had the strength needed to explore the top of the world, where they could acquire a lot of 7 luminaries crystals. However, to strengthen God's Domain's player forces enough to resist the Outer World's NPC army properly, selling the Flame Beast puppets became a necessity. After all, the secret silver combat puppets required highly skilled pilots to exhibit their full strength. Ordinary experts wouldn't cut it at all. It would take at least a Void Realm expert to display the Flame Beast puppet's Tier 5 combat power. There were only so many Void Realm experts in Zero Wing. Even if their numbers kept increasing, the rate of increase couldn't match the Flame Beast puppet's production rate. Zero Wing sales of Flame Beast puppets immediately boosted the overall combat power of the player forces, hindering the Outer World forces' advance. The guild even earned over 200,000 7 luminaries crystals from the exchanges, increasing Shi Feng's stockpile to 400,000. Apart from the player's side, the number of NPC armies gathered at the Fire Dragon Empire's borders increased a lot during this past month. On the Outer World NPC's side, close to half of the NPC army had already assembled outside the Fire Dragon Empire, preparing to launch an all-out assault on the Empire. Blackwing City, Stargazing Tower. Looking at the pile of 7 luminaries crystals in front of him, Shi Feng took a deep breath and mentally prepared himself. During this past month he had already fully mastered the law of destruction. He had also mentally simulated the creation process for his superior divine body hundreds of times to improve his chances of success. Without further elevating his concentration standard, he couldn't increase his success rate any further. However, raising his concentration standard was impossible within a short period. I have 4 chances. This should be enough with a 30% success rate. After saying so, Shi Feng followed the records of the ancient god's legacy and began constructing his superior divine body using the law of destruction. Constructing a divine body was much more complicated than constructing a mana body. This was because a divine body was akin to a miniature world, not something that could be completed with just a few magic arrays. It required more than 300 Grandmaster magic arrays as its core. These Grandmaster magic arrays would then absorb the power within the supplied 7 luminaries crystals through the designated world law and create a complete miniature world. Simultaneously manipulating so many Grandmaster magic arrays was unfeasible without Tier 6 concentration. Meanwhile, the process of constructing a superior divine body was even more rigorous. A superior divine body needed over 1,000 Grandmaster magic arrays as its core. Unless one's control of mana reached a certain level, manipulating such a complex core magic array was out of the question. Moreover, the mana within 7 luminaries crystals was of incomparable purity, more than 10 times heavier than even ordinary solid mana, and thus incredibly difficult to manipulate. The next moment, Shi Feng stimulated 100,000 7 luminaries crystals with his mana and guided the mana that burst out from them into the 1,000 plus Grandmaster magic arrays he had pre-constructed. Boom. However, partway through activating the magic arrays, half of them suddenly stopped working, and the entire core magic array crumbled. Failure. Manipulating the 7 luminaries crystals' mana indeed isn't easy. Shi Feng wasn't too surprised by his failure. After all, this was his first time manipulating mana from 7 luminaries crystals. Following this, he rested for 3 hours. After his mental state had fully recovered, he promptly began his second attempt. Boom. Another failure. Third attempt. This time, Shi Feng had a crazy idea utilizing the light of 2 worlds' golden soul to elevate his soul's standard. Although Golden Soul had a short duration, he could use this buff to get through the instability caused by the initial burst of mana. The only problem with this plan was that his concentration standard would plummet once Golden Soul's duration ended, which would increase the difficulty of manipulating the core magic array afterward. Golden Soul activate. Shifeng tightened his grip on the Light of Two Worlds as he decided to take the risk. As expected, he got through the initial burst of mana much more easily with his elevated concentration standard, and he activated all of the Grandmaster magic arrays right away. He also guided the 7 Luminaries crystals mana into these magic arrays with relative ease. However, when he had guided half of the mana into the magic arrays, Golden Soul lapsed. The buff's disappearance nearly caused him to lose control of the mana. 5 minutes. So long as I can last 5 more minutes, I'll be able to finish transferring all of the 7 Luminaries crystals mana. Shifeng gritted his teeth and struggled desperately to keep the Grandmaster magic arrays in operation. He also overburdened his mind, not daring to make even the slightest mistake. 10 seconds. 30 seconds. Shifeng's complexion turned paler and paler as the seconds ticked by. Sweat continuously formed on his forehead. Nevertheless, he persisted. After the 3rd minute elapsed, Shifeng's vision became blurry and his mind cloudy. His body also began shivering slightly. One last minute. Last minute. Shifeng started feeling very sleepy, and even the system had begun warning him to log out and rest. However, he forced himself to remain conscious, going as far as biting his tongue and using the pain to stay awake. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. 10 seconds. 30 seconds. At this point, the world around Shifeng had become one big blur, and his mind was basically shutting down already. However, relying on instinct and his familiarity with manipulating magic arrays, he was barely able to continue guiding the 7 Luminaries crystals mana into the Grandmaster magic arrays and keep them operating normally. Shortly afterward, though, Shifeng's consciousness lapsed briefly, and he lost control of the core magic array. Did I fail? After Shifeng recovered from his brief lapse, his heart sank. At this time, though, the sound of a system notification entered his ears. System, congratulations. You have successfully constructed a superior divine body. The constructed superior divine body's completion rate is at 92% and has reached the Tier 6 standard. The constructed superior body is evaluated to be at the epic rank. Do you wish to get promoted to Tier 6? Chapter 29 18 New World Grand Finale, Fire Dragon Empire, Million Forest City. Currently, over 50 million expert players had gathered in Million Forest City, the largest city in the south of the Fire Dragon Empire. Even the weakest among these players was a level 100+, Tier 3 player. The number of Tier 4 players gathered even exceeded 10,000. However, an indescribably solemn atmosphere shrouded Million Forest City, and everyone looked tense. This was because Million Forest City was the biggest barrier in the south. If the Outer World NPC army broke through here, it could march straight for Flame Dragon City. The executives of the various player forces had gathered on top of Million Forest City's front wall. Their faces were pallid as they quietly observed the Outer World NPC army hidden in the distant forest. These Outer World NPCs are simply insane. They actually gathered 1/3 of their total forces just to attack Million Forest City. Are they planning to fight to the death? 16th Cloud, the second vice guild leader of Shining Tiger and an expert who had reached Tier 5, said, frowning as she observed the Outer World's NPC army through a magic mirror. The Outer World NPCs and players had a numerical advantage over God's Domain's NPCs and players in terms of Tier 4 combatants. Logically, they should have split up and attacked multiple locations, as this would bring them the most benefits. The biggest advantage God's Domain's players had was their ability to get resurrected and rejoin the battle quickly. If the Outer World forces split up and attacked numerous locations simultaneously, God's Domain's players would likewise have to split up and guard multiple locations. Moreover, God's Domain's players would have to guard more locations than what was necessary to prevent ambushes. This would result in a huge waste of combat power. Hence, if God's Domain's players could gather all their experts in one location and have an all-out battle, it naturally couldn't be better for them. Maybe they think their chances of victory are slim, so they plan to concentrate their forces to secure a decisive victory. After all, God's domain's various kingdoms and empires are continuously sending their NPC armies to reinforce the Fire Dragon Empire. The longer the war goes on, the better it would be for us. Perhaps they don't wish to drag things out any longer. Unyielding Soul's unyielding heart, who had similarly reached Tier 5, said, smiling. During the past month of battles at the Fire Dragon Empire's borders, the Empire's defenders had constantly been at a disadvantage. However, as time passed, the number of NPC armies gathered in the Empire increased, gradually tipping the scales to the Empire's side. Moreover, in this past month alone, over 100 players had reached Tier 5. Unyielding Heart had to admit that the War of Worlds was incredibly helpful to the development of players, especially during the defense of the Fire Dragon Empire. Although the Outer World NPCs scattered across the eastern continent hadn't fully gathered yet, the battles taking place at the Fire Dragon Empire's borders had never once ceased. Meanwhile, through constant battles with the Outer World's Tier 4 NPCs and players, God's Domain's Tier 4 players were able to improve their control and understanding of mana rapidly and continuously. In comparison, before the War of Worlds, Tier 4 players would have difficulty finding another Tier 4 player to fight, let alone Tier 4 players who were at the Void Realm standard or above. At one point, Unyielding Heart even wished that the War of Worlds would last a little longer. Let's hope I'm just overthinking things, 16th Cloud said, nodding. Truthfully, an all-out fight was something she hoped to see the most. This was because there were currently more than 80 Tier 5 players gathered in Million City Forest, not to mention over 100 Flame Beast puppets and 8 Blue Thunder flying ships. Every one of these war weapons created by Zero Wing possessed combat power at the Tier 5 standard. Including the Tier 5 NPCs, there were close to 300 Tier 5 combatants stationed in Million Forest City. Meanwhile, according to their investigations, the Outer World army stationed outside Million Forest City only had around 400 Tier 5 combatants in total. The difference wasn't particularly significant. Even if they traded 2-for-1 with the Outer World army, they would still end up winning the war since they could be resurrected and rejoin the battle almost immediately. In reality, 16th Cloud and Unyielding Heart weren't the only Tier 5 experts entertaining such thoughts. The Tier 5 experts of the other player forces present were also confident of victory in the upcoming battle. And so long as they won this battle, the Outer World's NPC army would have difficulty causing problems in the future. Sometime later, when the number of players gathered in Million Forest City reached 70 million, a gigantic island suddenly appeared above the city, instantly triggering an uproar among the city's players and NPCs. Crap. Zero Wing. That is Zero Wing's mobile fortress. Isn't Zero Wing's mobile fortress stationed beside the secret Covenant Tower? Wait. This isn't the same one. I've seen the one stationed at the secret Covenant Tower, and that one only has 2 barriers protecting it. This one has 3. Zero Wing must have constructed a new mobile fortress. Amazing. Zero Wing truly is God's Domain's #1 guild. With this, those Outer World NPCs and players are finished. The mobile fortress that just appeared above Million Forest City was something basically everyone in God's Domain knew about. This was because the mobile fortress had allowed Zero Wing to establish its position in God's Domain. Now that there was also a mobile fortress protecting Million Forest City, how could everyone not get excited? Amid the excited cheers of Million Forest City's players, 16 players flew out of the mobile fortress. Upon seeing these 16 players, the players in the city grew even more excited. Even the city's Tier 5 commander and Tier 5 NPCs took the initiative to receive these 16 players. These 16 people were none other than Gentle Snow, Aqua Rose, Fire Dance, Violet Cloud, Yen Tianxing of a Silent Blade, Alluring Summer, Cold Shadow, Crimson Mask, Jilurong, Lifeless Thorn, Blue Frost, Zhao Yueru, White Feather and Invincible Swallow. Crap. All of Zero Wing's top experts are here. Even a demigod NPC has gone to welcome them. What's going on here? I heard that the War God's Temple recently added Zero Wing's Vice Guild leaders Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose to the 10 Saints. The 2 of them are even stronger than the NPC ranked 5th in the 10 Saints. Those ranked within the top 5 of the 10 Saints are supposedly close to rivaling Tier 6 existences, while those in the top 3 are basically Tier 6 gods in disguise. Zero Wing is truly a den of monsters. I heard that 3 of the 5 great super guilds' old monsters joined the 10 Saints only recently. Yet Zero Wing actually has 2 people in the 10 Saints now. Moreover, both are ranked within the top 5. I wonder when I'll be able to join the 10 Saints? If I can get into the 10 Saints, I can die with no regrets. For a time, Zero Wings members became the focal point of the entire Fire Dragon Empire. This was especially true for the players who had recently started playing God's Domain and were watching the live broadcast of Million Forest City's situation. When they looked at Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose, their eyes shone with ambition. They all wished they could become as strong and famous as these two women. Currently, Tier 5 NPCs were still existences to be feared for the various player forces, and even the King of a Kingdom had a difficult time meeting a Tier 5 NPC. Yet these powerful Tier 5 NPCs were behaving respectfully toward Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose. This situation was simply unbelievable. However, of the players in the Fire Dragon Empire, only the superpowers experts truly understood what it meant to be a member of the 10 Saints. The 10 Saints were existences standing at the very apex of God's domain. Although Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose were Tier 5 players, just like the superpowers Tier 5 experts, the difference between the two sides was like heaven and earth. Killing ordinary Tier 5 players was child's play for these two women. Meanwhile, when the Star Alliance's Galaxy Past and Purple Eye, who stood among the many players in Million Forest City, saw Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose, complex emotions appeared on their faces. Back when Zero Wings operations were still confined to Star Moon Kingdom, the two of them had treated Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose as their rivals. Now, although Galaxy Past and Purple Eye had gotten promoted to Tier 4 and were even top tier among Tier 4 experts, they were merely a part of the crowd gathered in Million Forest City. In contrast, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose already stood at the apex of God's domain. They were now existences that countless players looked up to, and even Tier 5 NPCs in the 5 great super guilds old monsters had to be wary of them. Galaxy Past and Purple Eye weren't alone in their feelings. Matt and Prosciutto from Mythology shared their complicated mood. When Feng Shihan had decided to betray Mythology and join Zero Wing, she had invited Matt to join her. However, Matt had refused her offer, believing he could develop much more rapidly in Mythology. Yet reality turned out to be completely different. Matt was still stuck at Tier 4. In comparison, White Feather, who had joined Feng Shihan, had already reached Tier 5 and become an existence he had to look up to. As for Prosciutto, he was confused by Feng Shihan's rapid improvement. In terms of talent, he was much superior to Feng Shihan. Although he had also gotten promoted to Tier 5, there had been a huge difference between them when they were both still at Tier 4. However, his Tier 4 mana body's completion rate had only been at 118% when he had gotten promoted to Tier 5. Meanwhile, according to Mythology's investigation, Feng Shihan had gotten promoted to Tier 5 with her Tier 4 mana body's completion rate at 120%. Moreover, Odin had said that Feng Shihan was even under consideration as a reserve member for the 10 Saints and that it wouldn't be strange if she managed to defeat one of the 10 Saints in the near future. Her strength already approached that of demigod NPCs. In comparison, Prosciutto's combat power was only at the Tier 5 peak standard, still nowhere near the demigod standard. While Prosciutto was in a daze, Zero Wings members had arrived above Million Forest City's gate. "You guys are finally here," Unyielding Heart said, smiling at Zero Wings members. "With you here, it's even less likely for the Outer World forces to take down Million Forest City." Even the weakest of Zero Wings' 16 Tier 5 experts present had combat power at the Tier 5 peak standard. Meanwhile, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose could take on 10 to 15 ordinary Tier 5 combatants by themselves. Their participation in Million Forest City's defense had narrowed the gap in Tier 5 combatants between the two sides significantly. "What's our current situation?" Gentle Snow asked. At Gentle Snow's question, Aqua Rose and the others turned to look at Unyielding Heart. During these past few days, they had been fully focused on raiding a primordial ruin in the top of the world, so they weren't up to date on the Fire Dragon Empire's situation. Only after receiving the Secret Pavilion's notification did they rush over with the newly constructed mobile fortress. "While I can't say it's good, we definitely have a fighting chance," Unyielding Heart said. He then took out a memory crystal and displayed the information recorded in it. "According to our latest investigations, the Outer World's NPC army has over 130 million Tier 3 NPCs, around 150,000 Tier 4 NPCs, and over 200 Tier 4 NPCs. As for the player army, There are close to 200 million Tier 3 players, over 50,000 Tier 4 players, and over 100 Tier 5 players. Upon hearing Unyielding Heart's words, many of the Tier 4 experts nearby felt suffocated. Setting aside the Tier 3 players, the difference in Tier 4 players between the two sides was simply massive. Even now, Million Forest City only had around 15,000 Tier 4 players gathered. In comparison, the other side had over 50,000. If Million Forest City's defensive magic array shattered, there was a high chance that some of these Outer World Tier 4 players would sneak past the city's defenders and reach the City Lord's mansion. That would spell the end for the city. After all, the City Lord's mansion's defensive magic array wasn't as strong as the city's. The only fortunate matter was that there wasn't a significant difference in Tier 5 combatants between the two sides. With the help of the city's magic arrays, they might be able to repel the Outer World forces. It seems the Outer World forces are intent on winning this battle no matter what. Aqua Rose was slightly astonished when she heard Unyielding Heart's report, and she turned reflexively toward the distant forest. An army of such size and power was more than capable of destroying an empire. Isn't that just perfect? If we can get rid of this army, dealing with the follow-up will become much easier, Fire Dance said, fighting spirit burning in her eyes. They had suffered a miserable defeat in the battle in Blackwing City. However, her strength had undergone an earth-shattering transformation during the past month. Apart from touching upon the entry level of utilizing a world law, she had also acquired 2 pieces of legendary equipment. Including her legendary weapon, she now had 3 legendary items. She was confident she could now put up a fight against a fallen archangel. None of Zero Wing's members refuted Fire Dance's words either. With Shifeng's guidance, they had improved their equipment standards significantly during this past month. Although they didn't gain any additional legendary weapons, they did acquire quite a few pieces of legendary equipment. Moreover, even the weakest piece of equipment on them now was fragmented legendary equipment. In equipment standards, they were in no way inferior to Tier 5 NPCs. Among their group of 16, Gentle Snow, Aqua Rose, and Violet Cloud were the luckiest, having each acquired a complete set of fragmented legendary set equipment. In terms of basic attributes, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they rivaled Tier 6 players. However, just when everyone was thinking about how to cope with the Outer World Army's offensive, the Outer World Army hidden within the distant forest suddenly moved. Boom! Accompanied by a thundering noise, heavy clouds suddenly appeared over the forest, bringing darkness to the area. The sky then split apart and 2 giant claws several hundred meters long descended from the massive tear in space. A short moment later, a monster several dozen kilometers tall emerged from the dark void. It had a gigantic mouth and hundreds of eyes and claws. The monster also exuded a turbid mist that corroded the surrounding space, causing it to disintegrate. The sight of this monster shocked the people in Million Forest City and the Outer World Army. So, this is the World Eater of Legends? 100 Ghosts' Elder Windshadow, who stood in the forest outside Million Forest City, couldn't help doubting his eyes as he looked at the big-mouthed monster before him. The World Eater was a monster recorded in legends, and he had only found out about its existence after stumbling across a record of it. The World Eater was born in the endless void, and its sole purpose in life was to devour worlds. In front of a World Eater, even the dragon race, God's domain's strongest race, was nothing. Even a Tier 4 infant World Eater could devour a Tier 5 dragon. Meanwhile, the World Eater in front of him was an adult. At its current strength, even Tier 6 gods would have to avoid confronting it. When Awakened Abyss, who had already reached Tier 5, saw the behemoth in the sky, excitement filled his eyes as he exclaimed, "Amazing! We're sure to win now." World Eater. Chaos Beast Legendary. Level 210 3 trillion. Similar to Awakened Abyss, the other Outer World players present also grew excited when they saw the World Eater. However, when Fire Dance and the others in Million Forest City saw the World Eater, a grim expression appeared on their faces. Although they didn't know what a World Eater was, they could still tell what a terrifying existence it was just by looking at its 3 trillion HP. After all, the average level 200 legendary monster only had around 300 billion HP, and even a Tier 5 fallen archangel only had 900 billion HP. Yet the World Eater had more than 3 times that amount. Activate the defensive magic array. All magic cannon towers prepare to fire. Victory for the Fire Dragon Empire. Mechabod, a level 200 demigod NPC and the commander of Million Forest City's army, ordered when he saw the World Eater starting to make its way toward the city. A total of 4 magic barriers promptly appeared over Million Forest City, the barriers stabilizing the space within a 10,000-yard radius of the city. The barriers also created a separate world within them, isolating Million Forest City from the outside world and preventing the World Eater's powerful mental oppression from spreading into the city. Miniature World. After seeing the city's defensive magic array activating, Aqua Rose used the Ring of Gospel that Shifeng had passed to her. During their exploration of the primordial ruin in the top of the world, they had managed to upgrade the Ring of Gospel to the legendary rank. Now the ring could call down a complete miniature world, and its suppression effect was only slightly inferior to the world mirrors. Although each activation of miniature world now cost 5,000 mana stones, instead of just 5,000 magic crystals, the skill's duration had increased from 10 minutes to 30 minutes. The skill's AoE had also expanded to 50,000 yards, and even Tier 5 players wouldn't be able to make use of the ambient mana within the affected area. Moreover, all hostile units below Tier 6 would be subjected to a 30% reduction in basic attributes and physique, while Tier 6 enemies would be subjected to a 15% reduction. After Miniature World's activation, the Outer World's Tier 3 combatants charging toward Million Forest City stumbled and fell to the ground like dominoes. Their movements also became as slow as a turtle, making combat practically impossible for them. As for the Tier 4 combatants, although they retained a certain degree of combat power, they lost their ability to fly. Unfortunately, Miniature World had very little effect on the World Eater in the sky, the Chaos Beast losing only 10% of its basic attributes. Even so, seeing this situation still let Million Forest City's defenders breathe out a sigh of relief. With the Outer World's Tier 3 and Tier 4 combatants incapacitated for the most part, they could focus on dealing with the World Eater and the Outer World's Tier 5 combatants, 1,000 plus flying ships and 10,000 plus Tier 4 flying mounts. Holy Realm. However, the Outer World's various superpowers had come prepared for such a situation. Immediately, 1,000 Tier 4 magical class players cooperated to create a gigantic 3-layered barrier to counter Miniature World's effects. Although the 3-layered barrier didn't completely nullify Miniature World's effects, it still allowed all of the Outer World's combatants to use the ambient mana. Only the debuff on basic attributes and physique remained. The next moment, hundreds of thousands of Tier 4 combatants and millions of Tier 3 combatants resumed their charge toward Million Forest City. In the sky, the World Eater lashed out at the city's defensive magic array with its several hundred claws, every claw carrying the power to crush time and space. Attack with everything you've got. Stop those claws. Seeing the approaching claws, Fire Dance promptly issued a command to the mobile fortress and all of the Blue Thunder flying ships present. Beams of destruction shot at the World Eater's claws one after another. Simultaneously, Million Forest City's magic elven towers and magic cannon towers also bombarded the World Eater. The series of attacks and explosions turned the sky outside of Million Forest City into an empty void. Unfortunately, these attacks managed to deflect only a portion of the World Eater's claws. Over 100 claws connected with the city's defensive magic array. The next moment, the 4-layered magic barrier shattered under the World Eater's attacks, unable to withstand the World Eater's power. All hail the World Eater. It's time for you natives to go to hell. When the Outer Worlds players saw the city's defensive magic array shattering after only one exchange, they burst into laughter. Originally, they thought this would be a tough fight. However, the battle ended up entirely one-sided. Now, even if they did nothing, the NPCs in the World Eater could still destroy Million Forest City easily. Meanwhile, the players inside Million Forest City fell into despair at this moment. How were they supposed to fight with such a horrifying monster on the Outer World army's side? There's no other way. Aqua and I will keep that World Eater busy. Everyone else, do everything you can to stop these invaders from entering the city, Gentle Snow said as she looked at the several dozen Tier 5 NPCs hindering the World Eater. So long as we keep the core magic array safe, more of God's domain's experts and NPCs will come to support us. The various guild executives present nodded in response to Gentle Snow's command and promptly went into action. They all took out their trump cards and readied themselves to fight a war of attrition with the Outer World army. Although the World Eater was powerful, victory still wasn't out of reach. Currently, many of God's domain's experts had yet to reach Million Forest City. Hence, the longer they dragged out this fight, the higher their chances of victory. Subsequently, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose flew toward the World Eater. Upon getting within attack range of the World Eater, Gentle Snow promptly swung her great sword and executed her mana technique, Spatial Cleave. Several dozen sword lights cut at the World Eater's claws, attacking Million Forest City, sending them off course. Aqua Rose waved her staff and summoned numerous gigantic serpents made of water. She then had the water serpents bite the World Eater's claws, preventing them from getting close to Million Forest City. Are they monsters? The Outer World players gasped when they saw Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose putting up a good fight against the World Eater. Even the Outer World Tier 5 experts were astonished by this spectacle. All of the World Eater's claws carried power at the Tier 6 peak standard. Even Tier 5 experts wielding legendary weapons could block only a few hits from these claws with their legendary weapons' active skills. However, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose did not use their weapons skills. They stopped the World Eater's claws using only mana techniques and combat techniques. For a time, Gentle Snow, Aqua Rose, and the World Eater became the absolute center of the sky. Even other Tier 5 players dared not approach the three of them, as even the shockwaves of their clashes could kill ordinary Tier 5 players. Apart from Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose, only Tier 5 combatants dared fight in the sky above Million Forest City. The two sides' Tier 4 combatants kept to the ground because those who tried to fly would get swept up by the shockwaves and turn into ashes the next moment. Hence, the Tier 4s could only become cannon fodder on the ground like the Tier 3 combatants. Currently, more than 700 Tier 5 combatants were fighting in the sky. Originally, Million Forest City's Tier 5 combatants should have been weaker due to their significant numerical disadvantage. Yet the two sides turned out evenly matched in reality, confusing the Outer World Tier 5 combatants. Damn it! Why are these natives so strong? The speechless awakened Abyss glared at Ji Lurong, who was fighting him. Not only was Ji Lurong fighting two Tier 5 NPCs simultaneously, but she also managed to pin him down while doing so. The level of skill she demonstrated in mana utilization was simply unbelievable. Moreover, Ji Lurong wasn't even the most conspicuous of them all. Instead, the most conspicuous person was Zero Wings Violet Cloud, the girl he had once considered recruiting into 100 Ghosts. She was practically a monster. From what he could tell, Violet Cloud should only be at the domain realm. Yet she could actually hold her own against over a dozen Tier 5 NPCs. If not for Windshadow, who wielded a legendary weapon, joining the fight, one or two of these Tier 5 NPCs would have already died in battle. As for Fire Dance and Fong Shirhan, these two women were practically Grim Reapers as they weaved through the shadows of the battlefield. Under their coordinated attacks, they could kill a Tier 5 NPC within 5 moves and a Tier 5 player within 3 moves. As more time passed, Million Forest City's Tier 5 combatants gradually began to gain the upper hand in the battle. Elder Windshadow, we've already lost more than 24 Tier 5 players. We'll be at a serious disadvantage if this situation continues, Jade Leaf, who had repelled a Tier 5 NPC with her battle axe, said to Windshadow when she saw Fire Dance and Fong Shirhan killing another Tier 5 player. Nobody can stop Zero Wings Fire Dance and Cold Shadow. Originally, their side had over 170 Tier 5 players. Now, only a few minutes into the battle, they had already lost more than 10% of this number. In comparison, the other side had lost only a dozen or so Tier 5 players. Moreover, these fallen Tier 5 players managed to get resurrected quickly and rejoin the battle. They had also prepared replacement equipment beforehand, so they lost hardly any combat power even after rejoining the battle. Windshadow also recognized their dire situation and frowned involuntarily. He had never thought Zero Wing would have so many monstrously strong experts, apart from Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose. Currently, Zero Wing's Tier 5 players were doing as much work as all of Million Forest City's other Tier 5 players combined. Just as Windshadow was about to have everyone retreat, a spatial tear suddenly appeared some distance from Million Forest City. A young man wearing a light blue robe with dark purple divine patterns on his face then walked out of this spatial tear. A fallen archangel followed after him, and this fallen archangel was none other than Zilliaware. With the arrival of these two people, Million Forest City fell deathly silent. Even the Tier 5 combatants in the sky automatically stopped fighting. This was because the young man's presence was simply too intense. His presence was akin to the midday sun. The aura he exuded while just standing still inflicted a stinging pain into everyone's soul. Not even the Tier 5 combatants present were immune to this pain. What a bunch of rubbish. You still haven't dealt with these ants even now. The scholar bellowed angrily as he glared at the Outer World Army's commander-in-chief. My lord, these heaven-blessed individuals are much stronger than we expected, and even the World Eater is incapable of going against them for the time being. Fez Tade, the Outer World Army's commander-in-chief and one of the 17 stars of the Holy Grail, said anxiously as he looked at the youth before him. Them. Scholar glanced at Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose, who were hovering beside the World Eater, a look of surprise appearing on his face. Transmigrators? No wonder they can deal with the World Eater. However, they are still too weak. After saying so, the scholar pointed a finger at Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose, a 5-fold magic array appearing at his fingertip. Immediately, everyone on the battlefield felt time stagnate. The Tier 3 combatants present even found their thoughts freezing. Tier 6 Curse, Hand of Death. The next moment, a titanic claw appeared above Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose. This claw was as large as the World Eater, and it swiped at the two immobilized women as soon as it took shape. It's over. How can there be such a monstrous existence? When 16th Cloud, Unyielding Heart and the other Tier 5 players saw the gigantic claw from a distance, despair overwhelmed them. Not only did the scholar slow down time for the entire battlefield, but he had even used a Tier 6 curse. This single attack could probably wipe out the entire Million Forest City, not just Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose. However, when the monstrous claw was only several yards away from Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose, a sword light suddenly shot out from Million Forest City and struck the claw. Boom. Accompanied by a loud explosion, the restraints on the battlefield's time shattered. Simultaneously, the space above Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose transformed into an empty void. The attack was blocked? Something like that can be blocked? Who did it? Everyone gaped in shock at the empty void in the sky, then automatically turned to look at the sword light's origin. The next moment, what entered everyone's eyes was a cloaked man wielding a golden longsword flying out of Million Forest City's teleportation hall. Everyone present gasped involuntarily. Tier 6. He actually got promoted to Tier 6? Everyone present was very familiar with the cloaked man. This was because he was none other than Shifeng. However, the aura Shifeng exuded was simply unbelievable, especially for players who had visited ruins left behind by gods. The power they sensed from Shifeng was one that they had only ever felt in those ruins. Only Shifeng's aura was several hundred times more powerful. Indeed, that was divine might. Guild leader, you succeeded? Feng Shihan asked as she looked at Shifeng, who had arrived before her. Although the divine might Shifeng radiated proved that he had reached Tier 6, Feng Shihan couldn't help asking for confirmation. Tier 6. This was the true pinnacle of God's domain. I succeeded. Shifeng nodded with a smile. Actually, he also wanted to say that he didn't just get promoted to Tier 6 with an ordinary divine body, but with a superior divine body instead. The difference between the two was akin to that between mythic and superior mythic monsters. The two were on entirely different levels. Upon hearing Shifeng's acknowledgement, Zero Wings members grew ecstatic. Now that Shifeng had reached Tier 6, the Outer World's NPCs and players would no longer be a problem. Moreover, Zero Wing would become God's Domain's bona fide #1 guild from now on. The Outer World players were dumbfounded by this development. After all, the Outer World's various superpowers were practically going crazy just trying to get their respective guilds' best talents promoted to Tier 5. Getting one of their members to Tier 6 was something none of them had ever dreamed of doing at this stage of the game. After all, none of them had any information on how players could go about reaching Tier 6. So what if you've reached Tier 6? You're nothing but another ant trapped in this world. Do you really think you're a match for me? The scholar said contemptuously as he looked at Shifeng. He then pointed the golden staff he held at Shifeng. Suddenly the world fell silent once more. When the scholar launched his previous attack, the Tier 4 combatants present had still retained some of their consciousness. Now even the Tier 5 combatants present found their brains stagnating significantly. It was evident that time on the battlefield had slowed by a far greater extent this time. The next moment, dark purple chains engraved with divine markings emerged from the sky and the earth. Upon seeing these chains, even the World Eater shuddered in fear. After these chains had completely materialized, they shot toward Shifeng from all directions. When the Tier 5 combatants present sensed the aura of these purple chains, an unprecedented fear overwhelmed them. Even their souls were instinctively warning them not to touch these chains no matter what. Are these the legendary chains of law? Shifeng was slightly surprised when he saw the dark purple chains. The ancient god's legacy he acquired contained information on the chains of law, stating that these chains carried power surpassing the Tier 6 peak standard. Even a Tier 6 god would have difficulty moving when caught by these chains. And unless the Tier 6 god's strength surpassed the Tier 6 peak standard, they would eventually die to these chains. Seeing the hundreds of chains of law closing in, Shifeng unsheathed Solomon's sword and brandished it together with the light of two worlds. Swords orbit. Shifeng moved freely, unaffected by the time stagnation affecting the battlefield. A galaxy of stars formed around him, each of these stars carrying earth-shattering power. These stars struck down the chains of law that came close to Shifeng, preventing them from coming into contact with him. After striking down all of the chains of law, the stars surrounding Shifeng spread into the surroundings. A moment later, the battlefield's stagnant time started flowing once more. Impossible. A look of surprise and confusion appeared on the scholar's calm countenance when he saw Shifeng emerge unscathed from his attack. Those were the chains of law. Even an actual Tier 6 god would have to flee when confronted with those chains, as they would lose their life if even one of those chains latched onto their bodies. Yet Shifeng had deflected all of the chains with a simple sword technique. What the scholar found even more unbelievable was that his time stagnation technique was utterly ineffective against Shifeng. Do you find it strange? Shifeng chuckled at the look of surprise on the scholar's face. Do you think you ancient gods are the only ones who can have superior divine bodies in God's domain? The superior divine body could be said to be the main factor behind the strength of ancient gods. This was because only with a superior divine body could one perfectly utilize the power of the world. Meanwhile, the chains of law was one method of utilizing the world's power. However, if Shifeng similarly imbued the world's power into his swordsmanship, he naturally could stop the chains easily. You have a superior divine body? The scholar was thunderstruck when he heard Shifeng's words. The superior divine body was something even ancient gods had difficulty creating. Meanwhile, in the scholar's eyes, Shifeng was nothing but an ignorant ant, yet Shifeng actually had a superior divine body. If the scholar told this matter to other ancient gods, none of them were likely to believe him. Your rampage ends here. After saying so, Shifeng disappeared and reappeared in front of the scholar, the speed of his movement so quick that it seemed as if he had been standing in front of the scholar all this time. He then activated World Breaker and Final Sword simultaneously. Two sources of light immediately enveloped his swords and fused perfectly. The combination of these two skills was something Shifeng had been continuously practicing and perfecting over the past month. Apart from the fusion of these two skills, Shifeng had also been modifying swords transmigration, and he eventually ended up creating an advanced silver combat technique. Swords ripple. A torrent of light cut across the sky, erasing everything that existed in front of Shifeng. When the light faded, the scholar was nowhere to be seen. Instead, hovering in his place were 3 of the 7 treasures. The next moment, the translucent figure of a person appeared in the empty void, and this person was none other than the scholar. At this time, though, the scholar no longer had any divine markings on his face. He looked and felt no different from an ordinary youth. Damn it. It's this outcome again. Why do you ignorant ants always come foiling my plans? Bellowed the scholar, who had been reduced to a soul, as he glared at Shifeng with eyes full of resentment and anger. However, his anger soon faded and he started laughing. Don't get too proud of yourself. You can't do anything to me even if you have a superior divine body. My soul is eternal and indestructible. What you have destroyed is nothing but a shell to house my soul. I can recreate more of such shells in no time at all. Sooner or later, I will have all of you ignorant ants disappear from this world. After saying so, the scholar laughed louder and louder, his mood getting better and better. The scholar's words made everyone on the battlefield shudder. If a monster like the scholar could resurrect infinitely, then it would be an absolute nightmare for them. That's right. You indeed have an immortal soul, and even true ancient gods can't erase your existence, Shifeng said, nodding as he looked at the scholar. He then chuckled and continued, However, while your soul might be indestructible, it can be infinitely weakened. I'm guessing it'll take you a long time to recover if that happens, right? After saying so, Shifeng collected the 3 items in front of him. He then took out the other 7 treasures. Immediately, the 7 treasures resonated with one another and instantly recovered to their peak states, revealing their original brilliance. The scholar's expression instantly changed when he saw the 7 treasures, and he turned and tried to flee into the void. However, Shifeng did not give the scholar any opportunities to do so at all, grabbing the repaired soul orb and activating it. Devour. The soul orb immediately began absorbing the scholar's soul, continuously weakening it. After this situation continued for 4 minutes, the scholar's soul disappeared, and the soul orb produced a 9-colored crystal of souls. System. Congratulations. You have completed the mythic quest, Ancient God's Awakening. Rewarding 1 Ancient God's Soul Crystal and 2 levels of World Authority. Ancient God's Soul Crystal? After observing the 9-colored crystal of souls for a moment, Shifeng tossed it into his mouth and swallowed it. He wanted to see what effects the Ancient God's Soul Crystal had. Moreover, doing so would prevent the scholar from regaining his power. The soul orb might have absorbed the power of the scholar's soul and made it seem as if the scholar had died, but that wasn't true at all. In time, the scholar would still gradually recover his strength. This was also what made Ancient Gods amazing. As soon as Shifeng swallowed the Ancient God's Soul Crystal, he felt a tingling and burning sensation in his brain. It was completely different from the refreshing sensation he felt when he swallowed the Crystal of Souls made from the fallen Archangel Garudika's soul. Only after this burning sensation had continued for several minutes did it gradually disappear. Is this the Tier 6 peak standard? When Shifeng looked at the world around him, he found its clarity and realism unprecedented. No. Even if my concentration reached the Tier 6 peak standard, there shouldn't be such a significant change. Did I just reach the Mental Strength Grandmaster standard? Apart from a breakthrough to the Mental Strength Grandmaster standard, Shifeng couldn't think of any other explanation for this situation. This was because his current thought process was at least 10 times faster than before. He could also manipulate mana from 7 luminaries crystals as if it was soft cotton. However, Shifeng didn't pay too much attention to these changes, as he still had a bunch of enemies he had to deal with in front of him. Run. Everyone retreat. Upon seeing Shifeng slay the scholar, the outer world NPCs and players started frantically fleeing the battlefield. All of them wanted nothing more than to run back to the world passage right now. They felt that only by returning to their own god's domain would they truly be safe from Shifeng. However, Shifeng had no intention of letting any of these people escape. With a swing of his sword, he effortlessly massacred the outer world forces and wiped out the forest ahead of him. Let alone escaping, the army of millions didn't even get to leave their ashes behind on the battlefield. The conclusion of this battle sent tremors across God's domain. The outer world NPCs and players in other parts of the eastern continent promptly retreated to their home world upon receiving news of Shifeng's achievements, none of them daring to stay behind for even a moment longer. In addition, Zero Wing became the undisputed #1 guild in God's domain because of this battle. As a result, countless players started trying to join Zero Wing, and Zero Wing's several guild cities became overcrowded with players. However, Shifeng paid no attention to these requests to join Zero Wing. Instead, he simply handed off his responsibilities to his vice guild leaders. After turning in the 7 Treasures main storyline quest, he chose to log out of the game and meet with Xiao Wuyan. After all, he was very curious to find out about Phoenix Rain's matter. And now that he had fulfilled the conditions Xiao Wuyan had given him, he should be qualified to find out more about the matter. Not to mention, after he devoured the Ancient God's Soul Crystal, he could sense things that he had never been able to sense before. He had many questions regarding these new findings, and he estimated that Phoenix Rain would have answers. Middle layer, Green God Courtyard. The Green God Courtyard was a place specifically reserved for the Green God Company's internal members. Apart from serving as a residence, it was also the office that handled the middle layer's various affairs. There weren't a lot of people in the Green God Courtyard. Even after arriving in front of Xiao Wuyuan's residence, Shifeng had come across only several dozen people. From this, he could tell that the Green God Company didn't have many internal members. When Shifeng entered Xiao Wuyuan's residence, he found the old man sitting in the living room and brewing tea in front of the coffee table. There was also a cup of freshly brewed tea on the other side of the coffee table, as if Xiao Wuyuan had known ahead of time that Shifeng would visit him. Pointing at the sofa opposite himself, Xiao Wuyuan looked at Shifeng and said, "Have a seat. You knew I would come to find you now?" Shifeng couldn't help asking. "Of course. I know everything you do in God's domain," Xiao Wuyuan said. Taking a sip of tea, he smiled and continued, "I also know that you've long since broken through to the 3-star mental strength master standard and that you've already reached the grandmaster standard now." "You knew." Realization dawned upon Shifeng when he heard Xiao Wuyuan's answer. "It seems the Green God Company really is the developer behind God's domain." "You're only half correct," Xiao Wuyuan said, shaking his head. "What do you mean?" Shifeng asked. "The Green God Company didn't develop God's domain. Instead, we only run it," Xiao Wuyuan explained. "The Green God Company didn't develop it?" Shifeng was a little surprised by this answer. From what he knew, there shouldn't be another company on Earth with the technology required to develop a game such as God's domain. How is this possible? Could there be a corporation in this world capable of surpassing the Green God Company's technology? "Didn't you want to see Phoenix Rain?" Xiao Wuyuan said suddenly. Confused by Xiao Wuyuan's sudden mention of Phoenix Rain, Shifeng asked curiously, "Can I meet with her now?" "Of course. You now have the qualification." Xiao Wuyuan snapped his fingers, and a hologram of a person suddenly appeared beside him. This person was none other than Phoenix Rain. "Your improvement speed really is as unbelievable as ever," Phoenix Rain said, smiling as she looked at Shifeng. "If not for Elder Xia keeping me updated, I wouldn't have dared believe you've already grown so much." "Where are you now?" Shifeng asked, getting straight to the point. He had been very curious about Phoenix Rain's sudden appearance. In their previous meeting, she had even spoken as if she had long since known that the scholar would cause a problem in God's domain. Hence, she had warned him of the scholar. Her understanding of God's domain was simply incredible. The Green God Company's refusal to let others meet with Phoenix Rain was also puzzling. "It seems you've already guessed that I'm not present in the world you live in." Smiling, Phoenix Rain explained, "You are correct in your assumption. I am currently living in neither Earth nor God's domain. Instead, I am in a world beyond God's domain. To be precise, I am living in the true God's domain." "You're not in the real world but the true God's domain? What do you mean? Did your soul get digitized?" Shifeng was shocked. Looking at Shifeng's confused expression, Phoenix Rain chuckled and said, "My soul didn't get digitized. Rather, my spirit is currently located in a special 3-dimensional world. The God's domain you've been playing in all this time is actually another 3-dimensional world as well. Because of a unique reason, I ended up getting smuggled into a higher-level 3-dimensional world, or a main 3-dimensional world if you will. On the other hand, the God's domain you've been playing in is merely one of the countless subworlds of this main 3-dimensional world." "3-dimensional world? The God's domain I've been playing in is only one of the many subworlds of a main 3-dimensional world?" Shifeng suddenly felt he lacked the brains to process the information Phoenix Rain provided. Although the various phenomena in God's domain could serve as proof that the world of God's domain wasn't just a simple virtual world, calling it a real 3-dimensional world was still a little too much of a stretch. Just what kind of technology was necessary to let someone mentally connect to another 3-dimensional world? What she says is true. The God's domain you are playing in is indeed a 3-dimensional world. However, this 3-dimensional world is very special, and outsiders can enter it only through their minds, Xiao Wuyuan explained, smiling when he saw the skeptical look on Shifeng's face. "Now that you're a mental strength grandmaster, you are also qualified to know the Green God Company's biggest secret. I previously told you that the Green God Company's founder is a mental strength grandmaster. He is also the first human in our world to develop his mental strength to the grandmaster level. After reaching the grandmaster level, he happened across a device that a 4-dimensional civilization left behind for all 3-dimensional civilizations. This device allows people to enter a special 3-dimensional world created by the 4-dimensional civilization. This 3-dimensional world is akin to a game world where everything is statisticalized, and people in this world can continuously grow stronger by training. In addition, the four-dimensional civilization left all its technologies in this three-dimensional world and made it so that whichever three-dimensional civilization succeeds in taking control of this world would inherit all its technologies. Therefore, any three-dimensional civilization that discovers this special world will try to compete for it. After all, with the four-dimensional civilization's technologies, not only can a civilization's citizens gain a near-infinite lifespan, but a three-dimensional civilization can also become the ruler of all other three-dimensional civilizations. A four-dimensional civilization? Although Shi Feng still felt skeptical after listening to Xia Wuyuan's explanation, he was now open to the possibility of God's domain being an actual three-dimensional world. After all, the humans of Earth were merely three-dimensional creatures. They couldn't possibly fathom the strength of a four-dimensional civilization, just like how two-dimensional creatures couldn't understand three-dimensional creatures. Our world is very fortunate. Not only did it produce a mental strength grandmaster, but we even discovered the device the four-dimensional civilization left behind. Hence, our world has the qualification to compete for the special three-dimensional world. It is also because of this special world that the Green God Company has managed to create so many miracles thus far. However, we were very weak when we first started out in that special world and could hardly acquire anything. This is because only mental strength grandmasters are capable of using the inherited device, and each grandmaster can bring along a maximum of only 60 people when entering that special world. Moreover, all the companions must be at the half-step grandmaster standard. Hence, the group our people formed in that special world is no different from an insignificant small guild in God's domain. Fortunately, as the people of our world continued developing and the number of half-step grandmasters increased, we eventually managed to secure the rights to control a subsidiary world, which is also the God's domain you are currently playing. Since it is only a subworld, the entry conditions aren't as stringent. So long as one isn't an infant or a child, one may freely enter this subworld. Improving one's mental strength also becomes a lot easier in this subworld, so we can keep developing half-step grandmasters. In your case, you even managed to become a mental strength grandmaster. Speaking up to this point, Xia Wuyuan looked at Shi Feng in excitement. Now that Earth had gained one more mental strength master, they could bring an additional 60 half-step mental strength grandmasters to the main three-dimensional world. This would greatly enhance Earth's overall strength. So this is why other gods' domains are trying to invade us. They were trying to gain the ruling rights to another subworld. Realization dawned upon Shi Feng. The subworlds of God's domain were akin to a nursery for nurturing newcomers. The difference between having and not having a subworld and between having one or more subworlds was massive. Entering the main world isn't an easy task. The more subworlds a civilization controls, the higher their chances of producing Tier 6 players or half-step mental strength grandmasters. In Phoenix Rain's case, she managed to enter the main world out of sheer luck. It's a pity nobody else managed to be that lucky, Xia Wuyuan said, sighing ruefully. Phoenix Rain's entry into the main world can be considered a rare opportunity. If she logged out of the game, she would no longer have this opportunity. Thus, upon noticing the anomaly, we immediately transferred her body to the core area. With the core area's power, she won't have to worry about her physical body even if she remains in the main world for a long period. Shi Feng understood what Xia Wuyuan was trying to say. Since a mental strength grandmaster could bring only 60 people with them into the main world, every additional combatant Earth could get into the main world was incredibly precious. Hence, it was only natural for the Green God Company to want Phoenix Rain to remain connected to the main world. But it's fine now. With you here, we'll have a much easier time in the main world, Xia Wuyuan said, smiling. It doesn't matter even if Phoenix Rain returns since you have brought 60 additional slots to our world. Once news of your breakthrough spreads, the various upper zone's old bastards will probably try to buy these slots from you. However, you mustn't sell the slots to them on a whim. Back then, those old bastards stole a lot of resources from Yuantian City's upper zone. Our upper zone will be relying on you to reclaim our reputation. If you wish to deal with Fu Jiuzhong, you can also apply to get him banished from the upper zone. I bet that old bastard in Haitian City's upper zone won't dare say anything about it. Shi Feng nodded at Xia Wuyuan's words. As for Fu Jiuzhong, Shi Feng was no longer concerned about the Infinity Master. This was because a mental strength grandmaster was many times more powerful than a 3-star mental strength master. He could even make Fu Jiuzhong suffer a mental breakdown. Afterward, just as Xiao Yuan said, the general managers of the various upper zones around the world all paid a visit to Yuantian City's upper zone, and every one of them wanted the entry slots for the main world of God's domain. Moreover, without Shifeng saying anything, Haitian City's upper zone had taken the initiative to banish and imprison Fu Jiuzhong. However, Shifeng did not casually sell his entry slots. After all, now that he knew the main God's domain's importance, he naturally had to give zero-wing priority for these slots. In the end, he chose to sell only 10 slots to the top 10 upper zones in the world, gaining one favor from these upper zones: the creation of his own upper zone. The upper zones located around the world weren't natural occurrences. Instead, they were created using the four-dimensional civilization's technology. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. However, the creation of every upper zone required a lot of resources, many of which these top-ranking upper zones could provide. Once he had these resources, so long as he obtained a few more items from the main God's domain, he could create his very own upper zone. Once he had his own upper zone, he would no longer have to follow the rules of other upper zones. He could bring anyone he wanted into his upper zone. Time passed swiftly. In the blink of an eye, 3 months had already gone by since Shifeng became a mental strength grandmaster. During these 3 months, Shifeng had brought his family and Zero Wing's many core members into Yuantian City's upper zone one after another. Afterward, he had Zero Wing compete fervently for resources and players in God's domain. He had even tasked the guild with preparing to invade the outer world and plunder the resources there. In addition, thanks to the upper zone's resources and the ancient god's legacy, Gentle Snow, Aqua Rose, Violet Cloud, Fire Dance, Cold Shadow, Yantianxing, Lifeless Thorn, and Blue Frost also successfully reached Tier 6. This meant that they had become half-step mental strength grandmasters and were qualified to enter the main god's domain. Inside a large mansion in the core area of Yuantian City's upper zone. After looking at Gentle Snow and the others, who lay inside their respective special rest cabins, Shifeng entered the main cabin and readied himself to begin a new journey. Log in,